What was the creepiest or most paranormal thing that's ever happened to you? Same. Immediately. Deadass would have flapped my damn arms and flew there. When I was in college I house sat for my parents. I'm a bit of a scaredy cat, so I locked every door leading up to the bedroom when I went to bed at night. I had the weirdest dream that someone unlocked each door and turned on every light. I felt cold and woke up to my dog barking. All of the lights in the house were on and every door open and unlocked. My dog wouldn't stop barking at nothing in the hallway. I sat in the shower with my dog and a phone the rest of night scared to death. Creepy for me. I was having a tense conversation with someone that I was close to years ago. The conversation quickly devolved into a passive-aggressive fight that ended with the other person getting in the car and driving away. As I started heading back inside, the other person came back, got out of the car, and started our conversation again. The tone of voice was totally different and the stance was different and the feeling in the air was completely off. I don't know how else to explain it. As the conversation progressed, the other person started saying some nasty and mean things that were completely out of character. I said, "This isn't like you, person." They said, "What makes you think that I'm person?" I remember continuing the conversation and talking to the person for a long time, but I don't remember anything specific. I do remember becoming more and more alarmed and knowing something wasn't right. Finally, I told the person to go home. They complied and left. I went back inside and started telling my sibling about the situation when the doorbell rang. Maybe 2-3 minutes had passed. It was the person coming back to apologize for the original fight. They had been driving around town for a long time and didn't want to go home, leaving things unresolved. I asked why they had said some of the things from the last conversation and they looked at me like I was crazy. They had no idea what I was talking about. Totally could have been lying. But that whole situation just felt dark. Scared the hell out of me. Scary shit, man. IDKY. But this reminds me of a very creepy Doctor Who episode. 15 years out and thinking about that whole event still makes me anxious. I had a friend like this with dissociative identity disorder. Hilarious at times, but can be seen as scary, I suppose. You already sent me this email, John. Did I? Must have been one of my alters. Sorry mate. That's cool. Who's this I'm talking to? Carl. Tell John that you've already sent me the email, else I'll get it a third time. Cool. Thanks Kato Damo. I was a manager of computer repair for a retailer a couple years ago. We had a client's computer in the back running various malware and virus scans. I was doing morning paperwork in the back near the computer. This PC had its screensaver on displaying random photos from the My Pictures folder. Various family members, children's birthday parties, the usual stuff. Then from then on, I swear to God I saw a picture of a woman from the shoulders up with her throat cut. As soon as I realized what I was making out, I directed my full attention and it was back to photos of a car show. As the day went on I thought nothing of it and proceeded continue my work until I was bringing another customer's PC to the back to work on, and again from my peripheral I could have sworn I saw a bloody body inbound in a trunk of a car. At that moment I began to freak out. I grabbed one of my employees, explained to him the situation. We then sat for 10 minutes and watched this screensaver. It is against company policy to search through the client's personal files without absolute just cause. We then proceeded to see a photo, 2 bodies in a shallow grave out in the woods and another photo of a severed hand down in kitchen drawer. I then went and got the general manager and informed him of the situation and had him view the screensaver. We then felt that I would be in everyone's best interest to contact law enforcement. In about 15 minutes later, owner of the computer and another gentleman show up. I proceed to tell him that his computer is not ready and it will be a while. He then informs me that he was called there because someone reported there was some photographs of a grisly murder that we had found. I showed him his computer and then his partner then begins to laugh at him. Apparently he went against police policy and took some of his work home with him and had never noticed his work photos were being used as a screensaver. TLDR, a detective unknowingly brings me his computer filled with gory homicide pictures that get mixed in with his screensaver. I soil myself thinking I am dealing with a murder. Call the cops and the detective returns to investigate his own computer. Was he really a detective? There was some serial with a police scanner police buddy. I was living with my now mother-in-law in a house she had just purchased a few months before. We had all had various weird feelings or experiences in the house, but to reel a realistic out. Collectively, there were 3 dogs living in the house at the time. One evening we are all sitting with our backs to the hallway. This is significant. Watching a movie, all of a sudden my German Shepherd and my Terrier both perk up their ears and start staring down the hallway behind where we are sitting. I mean, full attention. I notice and turn around. The light in the hall was off. It was dark. But of course don't see anything. 5 minutes later, they are still staring and now growling. This time my wife and I turn around and we both watch as the light switch on the wall gets flipped on. Dogs went crazy and so did we. A few weeks later, same scenario. Light is off and we are watching a movie. My German Shepherd loved to play fetch and we always had a million balls around to entertain her. This time, she's staring down the hallway and wagging her damn tail. This time, we all notice again and start to watch. I swear to God, a ball, single orange tennis ball came rolling down the hallway towards her. We all went white. There were a few others, but Jesus, I hated that hallway. It never felt like a bad energy, but my feeble little brain was still scared nonetheless. Edit. One more story. My mom-in-law was having these dreams a few weeks after moving in about the house catching on fire and burning to the ground with a soul inside. Horrible. About 3 weeks after these dreams we woke up one morning and distinctly smelled smoke coming from the house somewhere. Panicked. We all started searching and eventually came to the garage. On a rafter, we noticed a smoke coming out from around a fluorescent light fixture. At that moment I realized, my God, it's attached directly to this old dried out beam. The light was left on all night and it was clearly burning the rafter ever so slightly. Lights are not supposed to be secured screwed onto a rafter like that. So we like to think our ghost hosts were looking out for all of us. After that, her dreams stopped. Thanks Ghosty. It sucks this is so far down the thread. That's a wild story. A scary story doesn't need much detail to be really terrifying. A dog's reaction is always spooky because they don't have hyperactive imaginations and are not susceptible to persuasions. Even more scary is that whatever was in your hallways can manipulate physical objects. This thing could touch you, grab you, etc. A dog's reaction is always spooky because they don't have hyperactive imaginations and are not susceptible to persuasions. So I read all of these stories yesterday morning and found them entertaining. Then went on with my day as usual. Last night my husband left for an overnight trip, so I fed the kids dinner, put them to bed, went to bed myself. Basically business as usual except one less adult in the house. Around 3 in the morning I woke up to my dog growling at my bedroom door. All I could think about were these stupid posts. Haha. He eventually quit and we both went back to sleep, but it was unnerving as hell. Have you ever sleepwalked before? Also, I too am a huge scaredy cat when I'm alone in my house. I have to quadruple check all the locks on every window and door in my house and ensure all doors are closed before I go to bed. I also make sure I leave the kitchen light on, so that it looks like someone's home from the outside. Occasionally I hear random voices in small outbursts of unintelligible words. And by occasionally I mean maybe 2 or 3 times a year. I usually chalk that up to the fact stress can cause auditory hallucinations. This time though, I clearly heard my mom's voice yell my name, like she was right next to me. I shot up out of bed and all the lights were off. I was half asleep and terrified. Obviously the power had just gone out since it was storming, but the scream from my mom's voice made it 1000x scarier in the moment. This reminds me so much of the house I grew up in. The hallway was terrifying and there was always something going on with the light. A few times my dogs got all amped up and started barking at the light fixture too. Scared the crap out of me. The light had 2 switches, one at either end of the hall. The issue is they didn't always work. Sometimes you could flip the switch and it would turn on, but sometimes it wouldn't. Sometimes you had to run down the hall, flip the other switch, and even then it still wouldn't go. Then you'd have to run back and it might turn on. Super weird. Anyway, one night I was home in the living room with my sister and suddenly my stereo in my bedroom, at the end of the hall, started blasting. And I mean blasting. I do not listen to my music loud. This isn't the first time that happened, but it always creeps me out, so I just decided to run for it and shut it off ASAP. Not bother with the creepy light switch. I get about 2 feet away from the end of the hall and something shoves me and I land flat on my back. My head smacked the ground. My sister witnessed this and it really freaked her out. Me too. But I was a bit dazed. I just got up and ran to my bedroom to shut off the music. So creepy. Not creepy, but definitely paranormal. I was about 17. And was in my bedroom crying my eyes out over something. Home could be difficult at times. And that evening I was really upset. I really needed someone to talk to, but the only phone in the house was downstairs where my parents were, so calling a friend wasn't an option. I didn't know what to do to deal with the crap I was trying to live with and really felt that it couldn't go on for much longer. I remember thinking, please, someone, just help me, not a prayer as such. I'm not really sure if that does any good. More sort of mental scream into the void. There was definitely no one in the room with me. It was a tiny room and I had my back to a chest of drawers. And then I felt a something on my left shoulder, as if someone was standing behind me and resting their hand on me. I could feel the weight of each individual finger, and the palm cupping my shoulder, and I could feel warmth from it. It didn't scare me, but it was enough to stop me crying. I guess the feeling lasted for a minute or so and then just stopped. I have no idea what it was, but it was enough to calm me down. I wish I could feel it again. My aunt had the same thing happen to her in college. She was sitting alone in her dorm on her bed, crying into her hands when she felt the weight and sensation of a hand on her shoulder. She always felt that it was her deceased grandmother assuring her everything would be okay. She says it calmed her down, like it did you. I had something similar happen as a teen. The woman who had raised me had just passed away, and I was distraught as I packed to move out. I sat down outside where we used to chat, and I just cried. Hard, ugly, deep sobs from my soul. I just wanted her back. I needed her. I didn't want to leave. I felt her bony hand on my shoulder. Felt every swollen joint and long nail. I instinctively reached up for it and nothing was there, but the feeling remained. 3. I miss you, Mom. I've had a similar experience. I got lost at the zoo and couldn't find my parents when I was around 8. I felt someone take my hand, but I could see that no one was there. It was a nice feeling, and they led me back to my parents. Not the only benevolent experience I've had, but it shows that there are kind ones that make you feel good, even if you don't know what's happening. I shared a room with a guy in college who was a musician. He'd stay out late almost every night and come home around 3 or 4 in the morning. Our room was a straight shot through kitchen from the front door. One night I woke up to the bedroom door opening and figured it was just my roommate coming home after a gig. I thought it was strange that he turned the light on when coming in. He knew I was a light sleeper and would normally use his phone's light to shine around the room if he was looking for something while I was asleep. My bed was twin-sized, positioned against the wall connecting the bedroom to the kitchen. When he came in, I was facing the wall. I kept my eyes closed and pretended I was still asleep because I didn't feel like having a conversation with a most likely drunken friend while I was still half asleep. I heard him go to his side of the room, opposite of my bed, and rustle around his desk and dresser looking for something. Sometimes he would grab some clothes for the next day and go stay at a buddy's house, so I wasn't concerned. Then I felt him start reaching under my bed. I kept a few things under there, but he would normally ask before straight up taking anything of mine. At that point I was really confused and annoyed by all this, so I made it a point to aggressively roll over on my other side and face the middle of the room and the direction from where he was reaching, so he knew I was pissed that he was ruining my beauty sleep. Then I heard nothing, but I could feel he shot up from under the bed and was just standing there. I never opened my eyes, but I figured he would either apologize for waking me up or something. But he never said a word. He just stood there. After probably 2 minutes with the light still on, I heard him leave the room and go to the kitchen. I opened my eyes after a couple more minutes because he left the light on in the bedroom. He wasn't in the kitchen, but he had pulled a knife from the knife block and left it on the table. I checked around the house and couldn't find him, but quickly realized my box, book bag, wallet, etc. were stolen. I called my roommate to see if he had been home, but he was miles away at a party. He still had his house keys and never gave them to anyone else prior. I must have accidentally left the door unlocked that evening, which was the one time someone decided to check the knob. Police never followed up with me after that night, so I doubt they ever caught the guy. I can't imagine what would have happened if I ever did open my eyes and see that guy standing there, or if I chased him out to the kitchen. TLDR. Someone walked into my bedroom while I was still asleep, stole my stuff, and watched me from the side of my bed. Your story is creepier than drawers banging or black faceless shadowman. I'm glad you didn't get stabbed to death that night over a few possessions. I was driving to pick up my friend from the airport around 10 at night. His girlfriend was also with me as she wanted to see him as soon as possible. We were going down some dark, super lonely back road. I've never been that way before, but I was following good old Apple Maps. Eventually we came up alongside a train that was matched with our speed, so we couldn't see out past it on the right side of the car. After a couple minutes of that, we came upon a train yard on our left. A very spooky, very generic horror movie train yard. Nothing crazy yet, except for the fact that it went on and on and on. We probably spent 10 minutes driving at 45 miles an hour down a dark back road with a train yard on our left and a train on our right blocking the view. Eventually we made it back into society and picked up my friend from the airport. We told him all about the spooky train yard and train and were excited to drive back and show him just how much it was like a generic horror film. We drove back down the same roads. It wasn't there, we never passed a train yard. There were no trains on the tracks. Now on our left, friend's girlfriend and I flipped out. We swore up and down we drove right along the train yard for a long time. The drive home felt much shorter. Apple Maps. The fact it even took you back in the same direction was a miracle. Count your blessings. Why don't you check on Google Maps to see if there was ever a train track yard there? They show old rail trails on Google Maps as a red line where the track used to be. We lived in a house a few years back, and random things would just go missing. Then they'd turn up somewhere else. We never really thought hard on it cause they were never expensive or important things. So because of this none of us ever mentioned it to each other. Fast forward and mum loses an earring. Not a huge deal but it's a nice dangly pair she wears frequently. Maybe a month later I come home and find it perfectly laid out in the middle of the ground at the end of a high traffic hallway. It has 3 doors at the end. Take a photo and show mum when she gets back. Give her back her earring and we discuss the oddity. I mention that lately I've been misplacing random inconsequential stuff like staplers. And she looks at me and she goes, "That's weird." Me too. Our housemate gets home and we mention it and he goes, "Oh man, so weird. My razor vanished for a while and I found it back on my sink one day." So basically we're all convinced there was a friendly ghost attached to that house that just misplaced things to let us know they were present. I lived in a house like this when I was a child. Small things would get moved around when you weren't looking or faucets would turn on when you left a room, that kind of stuff. Nothing ever malicious. I never told my mom about it because I was young enough to not care and I never got any bad vibes or anything. Years later I am in my late teens or early 20s and we start talking about that house. Mom starts telling me about the family that lived there before us and she decides I am old enough to know the history of that house. The dad of the family that previously lived in the house shot himself in the laundry room and the story all added up, so I believed her. The linoleum in the laundry room was ripped up but the rest of the room looked newer than the rest of the house. Because some of it had to be redone and it was a really nice house in a fantastic neighborhood that we were paying next to nothing for. I told mom maybe that's who kept messing with all my stuff when we lived there. And she said probably because it happened to her too. The dead guy's name was Walter and she said when things happened to her she'd say quit it. Walter or Walter. You better stop. It's just so funny to me thinking about my mom having full-on conversations with this ghost. I was 15ish and babysitting a neighbor girl down the road from my parents' house. The house was older, but I never thought it was creepy. They also had this awful rat terrier that would bark at everything. Worst dog ever. Once the girl went to bed, I sat in the living room and was watching TV. The dog started freaking out, but instead of barking at the door like normal, she started barking at the corner of the room. Then she would run to another room and bark and come back to where I was like she was following something. Finally she stayed by the kitchen barking for a solid 2 minutes. Afraid that she was going to wake the girl up, I went into the kitchen to quiet her down. When I walked in I froze and saw that every single cabinet door in the kitchen was open. All of them. I grabbed the dog and ran to the living room. After she stopped barking, I went back into the kitchen and closed everything. Thankfully the dad finally came home soon after. I refused to go back and my parents never believed me. I still get freaked out when I think about it. My boyfriend and I woke up in separate parts of the house in hysterics, naked and covered in sweat. When we both finally calmed down and talked, we realized we had the same dream of being surrounded by a group of black and white people with no mouths. Whenever shit like this happens, the logical answer is, get out of the house. You never know when you're just both dying of carbon monoxide poisoning or similar. I once read an article by some ghost hunters describing all the times they'd investigated and found non-ghost explanations for what people had reported as ghosts. In one case, it was a furnace leaking carbon monoxide. In another, the owners had combined medications and inadvertently created a hallucinogen. In one case, it was a furnace leaking CO2. Probably carbon monoxide, not carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is far less potent a poison. I kinda wanna hear more about this. What do you guys believe happened? Anything else weird happened before or after? Do you guys live there? And is it suburb or what? Lol, sorry if it's a lot of question, just really curious. This was very much the TLDR. We tried to rule out everything. A few months later, after I had broken up with him, I was living there alone and started receiving a stream of phone calls playing a recording of the exact same thing. It was someone saying my name over and over again with various tones while someone else laughed in the background. I managed to catch the recording on my answering machine. This was before cell phones were super common, and played it for a few people who decided that the person laughing was me and that the person calling my name was someone trying to wake me up. I had my locks changed the day after that consensus. When I came home, my house had been completely ransacked. Nothing was stolen. I still called the police. The cop who arrived I actually knew socially. Coincidentally, he told me I was being stalked, and that this person was making sure I knew they could still get in my house. He also agreed the laughter was my voice and that this person had gotten close enough to me to record me. I locked down my life after that, stopped having people over, became extremely paranoid. However, I was having a small get-together on my birthday the same year. Two of my friends were outside when a group of people came out of the darkness. They both said that they seemingly appeared out of nowhere and were standing in a triangle formation. Again, WTF can you do? I obviously did not renew my lease and moved out. In fact, I moved to a different state altogether. My next place was a busy apartment building on the 3rd floor with interior stairwell only. Shit calmed down after that. I have since become a sleepwalker and have to take something to fall asleep or I will wake up screaming. Sheesh, I'd fuck out of there so fast, like no thanks, I'd rather not be a sacrifice. Exploding head syndrome. Wikipedia webpage. Individuals with exploding head syndrome hear or experience loud imagined noises as they are falling asleep or waking up. I was also about to mention this as it's something I suffer from. Was scary at first, but eventually I got used to it. I am from the Indian town of Bhubaneswar. I have never quite believed in supernatural or anything outside the purview of science. This creepy incident happened at the time my grandmother died. Being a traditional family, we performed numerous rituals for her so-called heavenly abode to be pleasant. Most of these rituals don't make sense to me, nor do they do now, but I decided against questioning as the timing was gloomy and everyone was mourning. One of these rituals was the preservation of lights inside a closed container. As part of the ritual, her kids, which included my father, are supposed to make a journey taking her corpse from Bhubaneswar to the holy city of Puri, around 50 km, where the Jagannath temple resides, and her sons are supposed to burn her there, perform the puja and set the ashes on its path to the Bay of Bengal. Meanwhile, there will be a container placed in our home in her room where she used to live, which will be filled with sand up to a certain level, and a lighted earthen lamp is supposed to be put, and the whole container will be covered completely, and the room is locked from outside for no one to enter the room till the sons arrive back to home and then unlock the room. Apparently there are supposed to be shapes formed on the sand which will tell the path that she will take to the heaven. I was also told that when my grandfather died, the shape formed was that of a ladder, which was interpreted as him going to heaven, and ladder or steps. I of course thought all this was pure idiocy and didn't believe it. cut to when my father and his brothers returned from the holy city of Puri, and the room was unlocked and the container was opened after that, and what I saw surprised and creeped me out. I could clearly see wheel shapes being formed on all the sides of the earthen lamp, called deep in my language. The wheel shapes were not barely visible. I even took a photo, they were clearly visible. Grandmother lighting setup pic. Imgur web page. It still creeps me out how that is possible. Edit. It was interpreted that she is going to heaven in a chariot. It's really interesting to read stories from non-American cultures on Reddit. Thanks so much for sharing. Have you ever tried to experiment this without having someone die? I don't smoke and I don't have many friends who do, but I keep several ashtrays at home, just in case. So, one day, about a year ago, I was looking for some papers and I found one of those ashtrays in one of the cupboards. It was completely empty and quite clean. BTW. I was pretty busy that day, so instead of putting the ashtray back in the cupboard, I just laid it on the kitchen table and went to do some repair work in the garage. I returned inside the house about an hour later, and the ashtray, still lying on the kitchen table, was filled with cigarette ash. No cigarette butts, just ash. I felt a faint scent of cigarette smoke in the house. Definitely not as strong as I would have expected, judging by the amount of ash. Like I said, the ashtray was definitely empty and clean when I found it and put it on the table. I took a kitchen knife and carefully searched the entire house. Nobody was there. I checked all the doors and windows. They were locked. Then I searched the house again, checking was any cash or valuables missing. But it was all there. I called all my friends, even non-smokers, and asked them did they happen to drop by my house that day. They all said number. I also inspected locks for damage, but there didn't appear to be any. I changed locks, just in case, and had trouble sleeping for days afterwards. I actually stored the ash into the bag, and I still keep it in the drawer, just in case. Though I doubt it will actually resolve or prove anything. The day after that bizarre incident, a murder took place in my neighborhood. A mentally disturbed girl with a history of drug abuse stabbed a convenience store cashier to death, following an argument over a pack of cigarettes. It is very likely unrelated, but sometimes I wonder. I don't keep spare keys in the yard, in front of the door or anything like that, in case someone is wondering. Maybe she had a bump key, came in to kill someone or something similar, started smoking, no one came, so she dipped out and ended up killing someone the next day. Not sure if this counts as paranormal exactly, but it creeped me and my roommate out. So my roommate and I lived in a 2-bedroom apartment with a shared living space. I had just laid down in bed to go to sleep for the night and my roommate was still up in the living room doing schoolwork. It was almost midnight. As I'm laying there on my phone, I get a call from a number I don't recognize. I answer it, expecting a telemarketer. Hello, a kind of high-pitched man's voice answers. Hey, is this my name? I should have hung up at this point. Yes, who is this? It's me, Derek. Remember, from high school? I was wondering if you wanted to talk. It's been forever. I went to an extremely small, rural high school, 100, and there was no one in my graduating class, or any class, named Derek. I said I don't know who you are, and as I'm hanging up I hear him say, wait, my name. Wait, but I hung up anyway. The fact that this person knew my name is really weird because, not to brag, but my name is really unique and I'm definitely the only person in my home county with that name. I went out into the living room to tell my roommate about it. As I'm telling her, she pulls up her phone and asks was it this number. She got a call from that same number at the same minute I did. She didn't answer the call and they left a voicemail. We listened to it and it kind of sounded like someone breathing maybe, or just moving. And then distantly, at the end it sounded like a group of people yelling, screaming, but it was distant. My roommate and I did go to the same high school but we've changed numbers since we graduated and there shouldn't have been anyone but close friends. 1-6. People who would have both of our numbers. The area code was in our home state but it was really far away from our hometown and we didn't know anyone there. Maybe I'm paranoid but it really wigged us out. As a child I moved around a lot, armored brat. And I insisted that every house I moved to was haunted. Nothing major ever happened. Just weird noises. Opening doors, things being in places that makes no sense. It wasn't until my second year at uni that I clocked on that I was haunted, not the houses. After my housemate suggested it. Anyway, last year I was on the way to my uni house from my job at a bar at about 3 AM. To get into the house you have to walk down a privately owned alleyway. Just as I reach the entrance to this alley, a man runs up behind me and spins me around. He's clearly had a bit too much to drink and starts trying to grab me, touch me up and convince me to remove my t-shirt. Naturally, I'm very uncomfortable and scared. I remember that the window to the house had an alarm that went off if the window was hit. I figured if I could get down the alley and hit the window, my two male housemates would wake up and help. Only issue, every time I walked down the alley he'd grab me again. After maybe 5 minutes of a struggle the man hit me. Next thing you know, the alarm on the window goes off, waking up my housemates and scaring off the man. Next day the police were called. We gave them access to the CCTV footage at either end of the alley. The man was caught on tape but, since most of the incident occurred in the alley, there was not enough evidence to charge. Later that day, my housemates and I decided to check the footage to see what caused the alarm to go off. There was nothing. No bird, cat or any other animal. The alarm just went off. This had never happened before and didn't happen anytime after either. I'm convinced it was my ghost. It used to freak me out but I'm kinda glad it's around now. He hit you. But that's not enough evidence to charge? What country do you live in? That's the thing. I've experienced a sort of sleep paralysis in that place before and knew my mind was doing it all. But when he confirmed it I was terrified. March 2015. My father passed a month or so earlier. I wasn't sleeping well. I would be up later and later at night. My father used to always give me shit for staying up so late because it's ruining my sleep schedule and affecting my work. Standard parenting stuff. It's about 2:30 AM and I'm watching YouTube on my PS4. Power in the house flickers. I check the window. No rain or wind or anything. I figured somebody hit a pole somewhere. Couple minutes later, power goes out for a second. Comes right back on. Nothing was affected. Which is weird because when power goes out, electronics reset. Check the window again. Still nothing happening outside. A couple minutes later, power goes out for almost a whole minute. From the couch, I can see the street light outside is still lit, as well as the other houses on the street. Power comes back on and everything is still as it was. Video continues where it left off. Clocks haven't reset. Nothing. It's now 2:37 AM. I audibly said okay and went to bed. Next morning I wake up for work. The clock on the oven says 11 something am. My phone says 7:23. It was around 11 when my father left the house the day he passed. Fast forward to January of this year. 3-year anniversary of my father's passing. I can't sleep. I'm upstairs of my new home, watching Netflix. Power flickers and goes out. I immediately said okay, I'm going to bed. Power comes back on. Next morning. Getting ready for work. Oven clock says 11:41 am. Dad doesn't like when I stay up till late. Edit. Learned the difference between affect and effect. This is a nice wholesome one. If my dad were to ever leave me a final message, it would also be get to bed. My brother and I were home alone one night watching TV. My mother was working a night shift and father was out. Father came home and pushed the door ajar and poked his head through to say hello. We both turn around and say hello back. Father closed door. 30 seconds after, another man opens the door to say hello. We both turn around and say hello back. Man closes door. We assume a friend of my father has come back to the house too. Anyway, about 5 minutes later I head into the kitchen where my father was making dinner or whatever, and I'm expecting to see his friend again. I see that he's alone making dinner and assumed his friend was upstairs in the bathroom. I ask my father who his friend is. My father looks at me and asks me what friend. I reply, the guy who came back with you. Dad looks at me thinking I'm some sort of weirdo. He says I came back home on my own. Biggest riot I've ever experienced. My brother was freaked out to the maximum. Remembering the man's face. He was pale looking and bright white hair. Let's see if anyone is home so I can rob the place. Hello. Hey. Oh fuck. These kids don't even care, I better duck out. Someone broke into my house while I was home. I heard noises and they were halfway in the window of my spare room when I walked in. I said, "Can I help you with something?" and he said no. I'm good, and jumped back out the window and ran off. I called the police to report it, and an hour or so later some officers dropped by and couldn't have cared less and were total assholes. I found out the next day they broke into a bunch of places in my neighborhood after they had been at my place. So technically the police could have acted faster and caught them. What happened after that? Did you guys grab a weapon and search the house? Call the cops? Did your dad believe you? Did you get an alarm system after that? I have so many questions. Was it possibly Santa? In the house I grew up in, it always felt like you were being watched. I'd see shadows out of the corner of my eye and dark mists that would dissolve when you looked straight at them. My older sister was always scared of the attic. Especially, she would barricade the door when we were left home alone. I went in the attic quite often to get various things. It's where we kept large toy containers, old clothes and stuffed animals, and I just liked seeing what I could find. It always felt like I was being watched, though. One time I went up there, and as I reached the top of the stairs, I saw a large, translucent alien-shaped white head looking at me from behind a box. I froze, terrified, and locked eyes with it for a few seconds before it slowly lowered itself down to hide. I turned right back around and left, telling myself I had imagined it, but scared to go in the attic. 4 years after that, I didn't tell anyone for years. My parents eventually sold the house and we moved, and I've never felt the same way anywhere else I've lived. Oh shit, this bitch can see me. Maybe if I just lower myself real slowly. Nope, fuck. Me as the world's laziest ghost who hasn't fully given up on trying to scare people. Yeah, I just visualized your entire story. Looks like I'm gonna see your alien friend when getting water in the middle of the night tonight. I used to have this reoccurring nightmare about this lizard man type monster who could see what I could see out of my eyes. So I'd run and hide and he didn't know where I was. But then as soon as I peeked to see if it was safe, he'd know where I was. So I'd have to leave that hiding spot and go find a new one, and then it would happen over and over and over again. A literal nightmare. Very Kafkaesque. And X200B. And X200B. But here is the real spooky part. I once mentioned the lizard man to my dad, and he got super white in the face and his voice was all shaky and he just said, "This dream took place at our house in East St. Paul, the one with the apartments right behind it," and I said yes. That's where I'd always go to hide. "How did you know that?" And he said, "Because I have the exact same dream." And I don't know if it was just the way he said it or just the overall situation or both, but I still get goosebumps thinking about it. It's quite chilling. One afternoon in college I came back from classes and decided to sit on the couch and have a snack. After that I just passed out. I had a nightmare of some bloody-faced demonish thing screaming in my ear at the top of its lungs. Woke up and went about the rest of my day. My roommate comes back later that night and goes into his room as I'm sitting in the main living area. At some point he lets out this random startled scream which leads to me running down the hall to see what's going on. He looks at me and goes, "I swear to God someone with a bloody face just walked from your bedroom into the bathroom." I never told him about my nightmare I had earlier in the day. I didn't sleep for 2 days. Nothing ever happened again. So, is it still sleep paralysis when other people see it too? My friend's dad was in the middle of paying for groceries when he stopped and turned to the people in the queue and said, "There is a crack and it's getting wider." Then his nose started to bleed and he collapsed. Later in the hospital he told his family that he had seen where it all ended and that there was a crack where there wasn't supposed to be one. He passed out again then recovered, saying that everyone would soon need to bend their necks. Then he died. Weird thing was that there had been several official looking men visit the family house weeks later asking them what exactly the father had said in the hospital. Edit. Forgot to add. They interviewed the nurses that were present too. The guy was a cement worker. Somewhat ironically, something happened to me last night. I got home from work very early in the morning. 2:30 a.m. My house has an entryway or mudroom before you actually get into the house. I open the front door, step inside, close front door and proceed to try and find the key to get through the next door to get into my house. So the only light in this entryway is through the glass on the front door. The rest of the room is completely black and I can barely see my hands in front of my face. All of a sudden I start to hear this buzzing, vibrating noise behind me off to the right. House is old, so maybe just weird house noises. Still looking for the key when I notice that the noise is getting louder, closer, and it has risen in pitch to something like if a woman was humming loudly. Maybe it's just ringing in my ear. Out of the corner of my eye I see a shadow that I thought was from light reflecting outside, move towards me creeping along the wall. That's when I noticed the vibrating noise was also getting closer to me and it seemed to be coming in the same direction as the now moving shadow. I'm shitting my pants trying to open this damn door, and when I finally do the noise stops. The shadow disappears and I'm hoping it was all in my head. My grandmother's house had a very distinct smell. Nothing bad though. Just a grandmother's house smell. Anyway, when she came to visit us she always used to sit in a specific chair in the living room. Shortly after she passed away, my father, my older sister and myself came home, and when we walked into the living room and we all smelled her, my dad said hello Ethel and the smell disappeared. I would be skeptical if just one of us experienced this, but it was all three of us. My great grandmother had her rocker and this same thing happened. The night she had passed, my mom and I had already been to visit my grandparents and my great grandmother a couple days. We all knew her time was coming soon, so we wanted to make it memorable. She even met her first great-granddaughter when my cousin brought her daughter to see them. The night after my cousin left with her daughter, I had a dream that I was talking to my great-grandmother and she had been sharing some wisdom and saying goodbye. My mom woke me up in the middle of that dream. At 4:30 in the morning. to let me know that she had passed peacefully in her sleep and we needed to say goodbye. Of course, in the grogginess that comes with being woken up from a sound sleep at 4:30 in the morning, I had said but I just said goodbye, and freaked my mom out. Fast forward a couple days past her cremation. We noticed her perfume scent randomly in the halls, the kitchen, and occasionally hovering around her chair. Now, anytime I go to see my grandparents, I'm always greeted shortly after entering their home by the smell of her perfume. It's rather heartwarming, honestly. I had a similar thing. I was really young when my grandfather was quite poorly. My parents and I used to live in a different country to my grandparents, and our situation at that time didn't allow us to go visit him. One night I had a dream that I still distinctly remember today. I was sitting in my grandparents' house, on the bed with my grandma. My grandma gets up, saying that her husband is calling her. I had heard nothing. She then beckons me to look under her bed, and I see a skeleton. I woke up to my mom on the phone. She'd just gotten the news that her dad passed away. I've never ever dreamed of my father. One night I dreamed of him and he was in my grandfather's study I had only seen pictures of, but it felt so real. Even the couch made that noise it does when you plop down into it. My grandfather was telling him what a disappointment he had been in life by not staying by his children. I looked around and I saw other dead relatives there, like my Aunt Margie, my Aunt Joyce, my Uncle Butch, some people I had only seen in pictures. It was like my whole family was in there but only the dead. It made me feel so uncomfortable all day but secretly happy because I had always wanted to meet my grandpa in one way or another. He sounded like such a cool guy. After classes finished, my mom called me and told me my dad had died sometime in the morning. They pulled the plug on him and he passed instantly. He had stage 5 pancreatic cancer as well as some other ailments that were too far gone to be treated, and he was living solely on life support. He wasn't the first person I dreamed about before the exact day they died. My grandmother had just been released from a rehabilitation center to help her walk better, and she was in better shape than she had been in years. The night before she died I tried to call her and I felt this urgency to reach her. I figured she was just sleeping, and the next morning I called like mad to reach her with no one answering. She had died that morning. I don't know if I believe in paranormal stuff, but my grandma also experienced things like that. Maybe we're just unlucky like that at being able to guess when people are gonna croak. I have the same experience with the smell associated with my now departed grandparents too. Also a little tune that granddad used to sing. It pops into your head randomly and it's happened to all of my immediate family members. I guess it's their way of saying hello. My grandfather passed away when I was 8 and my little brother was 2 or 3ish. He had this big lazy boy chair in the living room that he always planted himself in. Everyone knew this chair was Grandpa's chair. Anyway, we went down to my grandparents' house in Florida for a long weekend to attend the funeral, etc. We're all chatting the first night there in the living room, and my mom was sitting in the lazy boy chair. My little brother goes up to my mom and says Grandpa wants his chair back. My mom asks him where Grandpa is, thinking he probably didn't understand death. To which he responds, "He's right behind you." My mom bolted off that sofa immediately. This is funny, my GPA also had a lazy boy that everyone knew as Pa's chair. When he died I inherited it and put it in my bedroom. Part of me joked to myself that he would haunt me for taking it and using it, but he never did. Worst thing that ever happened was I felt guilty the first time I fapped in it. Quickest way to get rid of a ghost is to fap on their prized possessions. My grandfather passed away when I was 9 and my little brother about 2. and in the first 2 months or so of his passing, every time my family was all gathered in the living room, at some point my brother would always suddenly stop doing whatever he was doing and just look directly to some place in living room and start pointing and saying, "Grandpa." We never really questioned it, and with time it just went away. Still can't place my exact feelings about it, but it really is something that I certainly will never forget. The very first hotel that I worked at, I started at the front desk and worked 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. shift. There was someone there with me from 2 p.m. to 10 p.m. So I always had a little more than an hour where I was alone at the desk. Our kitchen closed at 10 p.m. so usually by 10:15 p.m. it was only the bartender and I still there. One night, it was almost 11 p.m. and there was a huge noise that came from the kitchen area. The bartender and I ran back there and saw that every single pot, pan, ladle, spoon, everything else that was hanging from the ceiling racks, were on the ground. After our shift, we watched the camera back and there was no one in the kitchen when it happened. I have no explanation for it other than it was one of the scariest things that has ever happened to me and I could not get out of there fast enough. Did you see all of the things fall to the floor by themselves in the video? That is super scary. Reminds me of that scene in Paranormal Activity lol. Yes. I was able to see every single item hit the floor, at the exact same time. I said the exact same thing. I looked at the bartender and told her that it reminded me of those movies. She claims to have a lot of experiences with ghost spirits and said that she knew there were several at the hotel, but that was the only time I was ever a witness to any of them. WTF. Throw that footage on YouTube. You could make thousands of dollars off of that. Earlier today I made a negative comment about Scientology related to their stalking, false imprisonment, and kidnapping on this, what's the most unsettling declassified information available to us today, AskReddit webpage. Our AskReddit post. It was almost immediately removed. Then a few minutes ago I got an email from a random account saying essentially to knock it off, and X200B. So, bye guys. We had a good run. When I was about 5 or 6, I was sitting on the back deck of my family home, an old farmhouse. I remember this old lady walking up the steps and going straight into the house without acknowledging me. I follow her inside to see who it is and my mom is standing in the kitchen room right off the back deck. I ask her who's here and she gives this confused look. Around that time, the original owner of the farmhouse died and I am 100% convinced it was her. A lady's voice coming from my closet asking for help. My closet door was cracked and she said, "Help me. I see you through the cracks." Every synonym for the word scared was coursing through my body. I went and checked to see if there was a woman in need of help, but nothing was in there but my clothes and shoes. People that go and check that shit out are different kinds of people, you crazy motherfuckers. In my previous apartment, I had been wondering why the closet had a lock on outside. When I first saw it I was like, WTF, some crazy person kept their kids locked up in this bitch or something. I just kinda ignored it. Whatever. One night I heard some shit and well, obviously I just stayed in bed and hoped for the best. It wasn't like a voice or anything. Just sounded like some light rummaging around in my closet. Like you. I'm not gonna go investigate, I'm not insane. The next morning I was looking around to see what was going on. Some stuff was askew which kinda freaked me out, and I noticed that there was actually an attic panel in the roof of the closet. Just a little square wood cut out basically. I got my still and was able to just push it up. Like seriously. One stroke forward panel. Light F. And realized that literally through that I could get to all 4 of the other apartments in the same building. Like, I could see the other panels in all the other apartments. So definitely not paranormal. But I'm quite certain someone was literally in my closet that night. And from then on I kept that bitch locked and was always a little nervous in the mornings, wondering if someone would just be in there waiting. Fuck that place lol. Obligatory this blow up edit. Imgur, the magic of the internet web page. Imgur, the magic of the internet web page. This is a true story. It happened about 7 years ago. The house was on the Colorado River, part of a gated community type thing. We were in the Cali desert. The old man found our house hours later because of our description and the buggy parked out front. He spent some time with us explaining his life story and describing his large family. He was, hopefully still is, a retired man living with his wife and dog in one of the neighboring communities and went out to adventure without telling his wife. No one even knew he was out there. He was really concerned with eventually telling his wife what really happened for obvious reasons. The dog broke a couple legs on the fall and he unsuccessfully attempted to rescue him, hence being trapped in a hole. I'm certainly no hero, just fortunate to be in the right place at the right time to help someone desperately in need. I will post a picture of the man and dog in the morning as I'm preparing for football kickoff. I was miles deep into the middle of the desert driving a dune buggy with friends and stopped to check out an abandoned mine that my buddy had explored in before. My buddy stayed behind while the girls and I went inside to look around. About 100 yards into the mine, a man's voice calls out, "Help me please," along with strange whimpering noises. We all froze and stared at each other wide-eyed for a few seconds before the voice called out again and the girls took off running for the exit. I wanted to run too, but something was telling me it was my buddy playing a prank on us and I didn't want to fall for it. Convinced he was calling down from some sort of hole above, I called back and followed the voice, hoping for triumphance over his little joke. Instead I found an old man and his injured dog trapped deep down a 30-feet drop. Saved both their lives. Wow, I'm really glad you didn't give in to fear of the paranormal, or that man and his dog would be dead. Holy shit, Motherfucker. Haven't you ever seen a goddamn horror movie? You never investigate that kind of creepy shit. You run your goddamn ass off lol. You went and checked. I would have probably migrated to another country. I was managing a theater a decade back when one particular evening, it was just after closing and only myself and another manager were in the entire complex. I was checking a theater for a lost item. The other manager was powering down our booth and presetting the 35mm threading for the morning and X200B. Now, this is important. The entire projection booth is run off of 2 sets of breakers, one at each projector and sound unit, then a main board switch at the center of the booth. Both of these sets of switches were in the off position and X200B. I'm walking down the steps in the theater to the exit. The other manager is whistling upstairs in the booth. It's otherwise perfectly quiet in the entire theater. Out of nowhere, all the speakers in the building issued a short amount of static before the John Waters mixed with death voice said, "Have a nice day." My skin felt like it was going to crawl off my bones. And X200B. I locked eyes with the other manager through the projection booth window and we literally ran out of there. Fuck whatever we were doing. The day crew can handle it. While I was on vacation, I had a missionary friend and the local pastor come walk the building and bless it. I had a few other religions come through respectively, as well as I made acquaintances with respective local leaders. And X200B. 10 years on, I still would never spend the night there. Fucking nope. And X200B. And X200B. This one isn't the worst. but it's always left me with a bad feeling thinking back to it. I used to live out in the country, way back almost to the end of a long dead-end road. There were only 2 houses that were actually lived in that far down. My dad's and the old lady at the very end of the road. There's my dad's house, and around it kind of off to the side were a bunch of old medium-sized barns sheds. I used to let my cat out sometimes and she would roam around the yard, and come back up and paw at my window when she was ready to come in. One night I had done just that, but after a long while I got a little concerned. She usually only stayed out for an hour or 2 tops, but it had been way longer. I decided to go out and get her. I go out through the side door on the house and immediately felt off, like something was there. I needed to get my cat though, and if something was there I chalked it up to a raccoon or other critter. I grabbed the mag light and set off for the barns. Calling for my cat, I found her huddled up in one of the barns, and she did not want to leave. It was like she was terrified of something, and was very stiff when I picked her up. I hasn't taken but 2 or 3 steps when this light shoots across the sky directly over me, illuminating everything almost like lightning. It made this odd woo-woo sound as it passed. My cat freaked out and started growling and clawing at me, which she never does. I actually dropped her because of it, and she took off towards the house as though she were running for her life. I did the same. I've never figured out what that was. I'd read about comets and things like that, but nothing says anything about the odd noise I heard, or the reaction my cat had. It could have been something simple and explainable, but man did it freak me out at the time. His one isn't the worst, but it's always left me with a bad feeling thinking back to it. What else you got? I'd love to hear it. Alright, I have another one for you. 2 friends, we'll call them Sid and Ned, and I were wandering about one night in the dead of winter. This takes place a bit past the end of my dad's dead-end road. The road ends and tapers off into a dirt and grass pathway that leads all the way to a creek bank that used to have a bridge running over it. The bridge was long gone, and we loved exploring that creek. The 3 of us were wading along, chilly water up to our ankles. Thank God for waterproof boots. In this creek it has steep banks on either side, ones you have to be very careful to get up or down. We're wandering along in almost total darkness, because of course we're badass teenagers and we don't need no light. I wish we had had one. Sid mentioned she hears something moving. Ned and I quiet down and listen, and sure enough, something was snapping the brittle twigs up the embankment in front of us. If you grew up knowing what deer or other animals sound like moving through the undergrowth, you're able to recognize it. This was different. This was wrong. We were able to hear what sounded like a bipedal being moving across the bank. The thudding of the footfalls was frightening as all hell, because it sounded like someone in heavy boots intentionally stomping with every step. Sid and Ned, the brave creek wanderers they were, hid behind me as though I would be able to do anything against whatever it was that was out there. Looking back on it, I'm a little mad about it anyway. We were standing there stock still in ankle-deep freezing water for what felt like hours, just listening to this thing moving around. It couldn't have been more than 5 or 10 minutes, and we listened to the progression from our far right to right in front of us, when my friends decided to use me as a meat shield, and then off to our left. Eventually, after the noise tapered off, we scurried back up our side of the embankment to head towards home. As we made our way down the small slope onto the trail, which ran between 2 large open fields, we heard a piercing shriek that sounded inhuman, but nothing like anything I had heard before in those woods. It was like the scream of a cougar mixed with the chattering of some angry, riled up bird. There are no cougars, at least not in Northwest TN. We froze for a moment to figure out where the sound was coming from, and we heard that sound of heavy stomping against the hard dirt, moving very fast in the dull moonlight we see in the field to our right. This weird, thing. I don't know how to describe it. It looked like a person, but it was wrong. The stance it had and the noises it was making, it was hard to see it due to the darkness. It looked like a tall, hunched over bald person with abnormally long arms. It really did sound like the aliens from the movie Signs. The weird clicking noises they made, only louder and more distorted like an old VHS tape. It almost made me sick, and I remember feeling utterly helpless and terrified, especially since Signs freak me the fuck out and it was just a movie. Needless to say, all three of us booked it back to my house immediately. I'm not sure if either of my friend paused to look back and see if it was following us, but I sure didn't. I kept my eyes locked on home. We never really talked about it after that night. Both of my friends saw and heard it, supposedly anyway, so I don't think it was my imagination. Something was out there with us that night, but I definitely wasn't about to poke my nose around and try to find out what. It took me a while to go back to that creek, and never again did I visit at night. During the day, it felt fine. I loved it. It was teeming with life and energy. I remember hearing odd screams from down that way every so often after that, but I tried to chalk it up to animals fighting, even if deep down I knew it was something a little more sinister. That's probably one of the worst ones, if not the worst. Hearing something or thinking you see something is one thing, but actually seeing it and having a shared experience with two other people, that's a whole different ballgame. I kept my windows locked tight after that, and would often flip the outside lights on at random just to have a reassuring look around the house. I never saw it again. A jet flying dark and cranking up the engine can't do this. I read an interview about them doing it to campers in the desert just for fun. Should I do it? Are you gonna do it? Okay, I'll do it. As a former SR-71 pilot, and a professional keynote speaker, the question I'm most often asked is how fast would that SR-71 fly? I can be assured of hearing that question several times at any event I attend. It's an interesting question, given the aircraft's proclivity for speed, but there really isn't one number to give, as the jet would always give you a little more speed if you wanted it to. It was common to see 35 miles a minute, because we flew a programmed Mach number on most missions, and never wanted to harm the plane in any way. We never let it run out to any limits of temperature or speed. Thus, each SR-71 pilot had his own individual high speed that he saw at some point on some mission. I saw mine over Libya when Gaddafi fired 2 missiles my way, and max power was an order. Let's just say that the plane truly loved speed and effortless took us to Mach numbers we hadn't previously seen. So it was with great surprise, when at the end of one of my presentations, someone asked, "What was the slowest you ever flew?" The Blackbird. This was a first. After giving it some thought, I was reminded of a story that I had never shared before, and I relayed the following. I was flying the SR-71 out of RAF Mildenhall, England, with my backseater, Walt Watson. We were returning from a mission over Europe and the Iron Curtain when we received a radio transmission from home base. As we scooted across Denmark in 3 minutes, we learned that a small RAF base in the English countryside had requested an SR-71 fly past. The Air Cadet commander there was a former Blackbird pilot, and thought it would be a motivating moment for the young lads to see the mighty SR-71 perform a low approach. No problem. We were happy to do it. After a quick aerial refueling over the North Sea, we proceeded to find the small airfield. Walter had a myriad of sophisticated navigation equipment in the backseat, and began to vector me toward the field. Descending to subsonic speeds, we found ourselves over a densely wooded area in a slight haze. Like most former WWII British airfields, the one we were looking for had a small tower and little surrounding infrastructure. Walter told me we were close and that I should be able to see the field. But I saw nothing. Nothing but trees as far as I could see in the haze. We got a little lower, and I pulled the throttles back from 325 knots we were at. With the gear up, anything under 275 was just uncomfortable. Walt said we were practically over the field yet. There was nothing in my windscreen. I banked the jet and started a gentle circling maneuver in hopes of picking up anything that looked like a field. Meanwhile, below, the cadet commander had taken the cadets up on the catwalk of the tower in order to get a prime view of the flypast. It was a quiet, still day with no wind and partial grey overcast. Walter continued to give me indications that the field should be below us, but in the overcast and haze, I couldn't see it. The longer we continued to peer out the window and circle, the slower we got. With our power back, the awaiting cadets heard nothing. I must have had good instructors in my flying career, as something told me I better cross-check the gauges. As I noticed the airspeed indicator slide below 160 knots, my heart stopped and my adrenaline-filled left hand pushed 2 throttles full forward. At this point we weren't really flying, but were falling in a slight bank. Just at the moment that both afterburners lit with a thunderous roar of flame. And what a joyous feeling that was. The aircraft fell into full view of the shocked observers on the tower, shattering the still quiet of that morning. They now had 107 feet of fire-breathing titanium in their face as the plane leveled and accelerated, in full burner, on the tower side of the infield, closer than expected, maintaining what could only be described as some sort of ultimate knife-edge pass. Quickly reaching the field boundary, we proceeded back to Mildenhall without incident. We didn't say a word for those next 14 minutes. After landing, our commander greeted us, and we were both certain he was reaching for our wings. Instead, he heartily shook our hands and said the commander had told him it was the greatest SR-71 fly past he had ever seen. Especially how we had surprised them with such a precise maneuver that could only be described as breathtaking. He said that some of the cadets' hats were blown off in the sight of the platform of the plane in full afterburner dropping right in front of them was unbelievable. Walt and I both understood the concept of breathtaking very well that morning and sheepishly replied that they were just excited to see our low approach. As we retired to the equipment room to change from spacesuits to flight suits, we just sat there. We hadn't spoken a word since the pass. Finally, Walter looked at me and said, 156 knots. What did you see? Trying to find my voice, I stammered. 152. We sat in silence for a moment. Then Walt said, don't ever do that to me again, and I never did. A year later, Walter and I were having lunch in the Mildenhall Officers Club, and overheard an officer talking to some cadets about an SR-71 fly past that he had seen one day. Of course, by now the story included kids falling off the tower and screaming as the heat of the jet singed their eyebrows. Noticing our habu patches, as we stood there with lunch trays in our hands, he asked us to verify to the cadets that such a thing had occurred. Walt just shook his head and said, it was probably just a routine low approach. They're pretty impressive in that plane. Impressive indeed. From Sled Driver. Let me start off by saying that I don't believe in ghosts, yet I'm still scared of ghosts. If that makes any sense whatsoever. At our old house, my cousin lived with us because he was a recovering druggie. He relapsed after a little. He would sleep in our basement and he had an box and everything down there. I always wanted to sleep down there, but he had college a lot, so I didn't want to bother him. After he moves out, He took his box rib. I wanted to sleep down but was too scared. My sister said she'd join me sleeping down there so it was less creepy. This went on for about a week until I felt comfortable down there. After a few days of me being alone down there, I wake up very terrified of what seemed like nothing. Suddenly I start seeing about 10 or so black figures running towards me. They were coming from our staircase, so no way to nope out of there. I started screaming as loud as I possibly could. I think I temporarily blew out my voice for a few hours. I remember screaming for my mom, dad, sister or anyone at all who would come to me. I was crying too. I woke up the next day and immediately ran upstairs and asked my mom if she heard me. My dad left for work already. She said that she didn't hear me at all. There are only 3 explanations I can think of. 1. I was getting bamboozled by ghosts. 2. Sleep paralysis. 3. I was up too late and my mind was tricking me. I dropped my mug onto the floor accidentally. Heard no noise when it hit the floor. Go to pick it up and it's gone. I honestly went to bed and pondered what happened and slept feeling incredibly uncomfortable. Edit. Jesus Christ, this kicked off more than expected. Obligatory thanks for the gold and alas I never did find the mug. Still bothers me to this day. Clip through the floor. See if you can recreate it. Might be able to shave off a few seconds in your next speedrun. This is a regular occurrence for guitar players and their guitar picks. They just vanish into oblivion. All of the atoms of the cup and floor missed each other and it fell through. Congratulations. It's never happened in 4 billion years of the universe and won't happen again for many, many more. Edit. Some kind Redditors have sternly informed me of my error. The universe is nearly 14 by 0. I wonder whether one night, years from now, there'll be a sound from that room. You'll walk in and find the mug on the floor. First one was me and my cousins were in the basement playing video games while the adults were at the hospital for our sick grandma. The doors on the 3rd floor started shaking and the dogs were going crazy. When we went up it stopped and we got THR call our grandma passed. Second one would be when I was younger. I was at a buddy's and my mom called me to come home. I left on my bike and when I got home my family was crying and freaked out. I asked what was wrong and they asked me where the hell was I. I eventually looked at the clock and it took me over 3 hours to get home from my buddy's house that was like 4 blocks away. I still to this day have no idea what happened and don't remember the bike ride home. 20 or so years ago while living in NM. Driving east on HWY 60 at night between Vaughan and featuring Sumner. 2 of us in the car and noticed a really bright light on the right rear side. I mean really bright. We then remembered that the train tracks were there. So we kept driving without really thinking about it. Well, the light stayed with us, which was weird because trains usually don't go that fast out there. So, then my friend rolls down the window and look back to see WTH it is and suddenly the light vanishes. Also no sound. So now we're a little freaked. We pull over to check things out. Well, a new realization sets in. There are no train tracks next to the road on this section of road. 34.486698 minus 104.776733. So, now we're really freaked out and bolt out of there ASAP. We told our story to people at work and of course caught some grief, but that's what happened to us. Edit. Sorry, can't get MapLink to work using my phone. Had something like this happen. Driving down this back road after work trying to get home since the main road was blocked from an accident. I enter this area where there's no houses and trees overhang the road, almost like a tunnel. Well, about as soon as I enter the tree tunnel, my headlights shut off. It's like 9 PM in the fall, so it's pitch black. I immediately stop and back up. My reversing lights aren't working either, so I just hold the wheel straight. I had only driven a couple seconds in, so I was maybe 100 feet into the tunnel. But I had been reversing for about a minute at this point and couldn't see anything still. I check my phone. It's dead. Screen doesn't turn on or anything. Watch stopped ticking. Nothing electronic in my car is working. At this point I am looking around and I can't even see the road or the trees that were supposed to be around me. I step out of my car and look up and can't see any stars or anything. No moonlight. I walked about where the other side of the road should be, and I just keep walking along a flat plain. Keep in mind roads where I am are angled on both sides so water doesn't pool up, yet where I was standing was completely flat. I walk backwards straight so I don't lose my sense of direction. I managed to get back in my car and just start driving. I was going about 80 for a solid 10 minutes, on what was supposed to be a winding backcountry road with a 40 miles per hour speed limit before I just decided to wait it out and sleep until morning. If there was even going to be a morning. I fall asleep, and wake up to the sunlight coming through my window, in the middle of a field, in the middle of bumfuck nowhere, no houses nearby, nothing. I go to check my phone and it's dead, but the screen turns on to let me know it has no battery charge left. Car turns on and all of the lights come on. Onboard GPS tells me I am about 5 hours away from my house, in a borderline uninhabited part of the state. Full tank of gas, no mileage difference from the day before. Watch is ticking normally and showing about what would be the correct time given the sun's position. I start the long drive home and haven't traveled that road again and never fucking will. You may have been abducted by aliens. Take that in as serious of a tone as you wish. Maybe you decided to stop to go to sleep and it was a dream. I hope you found Mrs. Todd's shortcut Wikipedia webpage. Gotta be careful with those. Sometimes people don't make it back out. Not paranormal, but definitely creep me out. I was walking home one evening and was up the road from my house, about 5 minutes walk away. As I'm walking I see this guy go up an alley, apparently not see something he was hoping to see, and turned around. We briefly made eye contact but there was nothing to it and he was walking really slowly. By the time I'd walked another 30 seconds down the road I looked back as I was turning the corner and he had only just emerged back from that alley. I'm now heading down the road leading to my street and there's a guy getting into his truck with his wife. The truck is facing up the street in my direction. He flashes his headlights, which I didn't quite understand. Then I hear a scuff behind me. The fucking guy from the alley is right behind me, like within arm's reach, even though I heard nothing until he was right there. I'm pretty sure I visibly jumped upon seeing him so close, and he's walking like an absolute demon. I mumble a greeting out of pure reflex and start to cross to the other side of the road, removing my backpack in the process. He doesn't respond to my greeting or even look at me. He's just looking dead ahead like I'm not even there. He just starts running as soon as I moved. He bolts down the road and turns right into another alley, and I hear some banging on a wooden fence. As I walk past the alley about 30 seconds later I take a glance and it's empty. He must have vaulted a fence or something. Like I said, not paranormal or anything like that, but it creeped me the fuck out. I still don't know how that guy moved so fast to catch up to me in such a short space of time, nor how I didn't hear him. I've got pretty good hearing and he must have been sprinting to catch up to me. Weird shit. Edit. I mentioned the guy in the truck because it didn't occur to me until much later. But I'm assuming he saw how the guy was walking behind me and was trying to give me a subtle warning. Thanks, truck guy. Edit 2 for me and you. I'm aware that this is highly likely to just be some drugged up fuckwit, but the topic was paranormal or creepy, and to me this was creepy. Please stop telling me it was just a druggie. I know. That kind of reminds me of a story in one of the scary stories to tell in the dark books. Some guy hides in the backseat of a woman's car and tries to overpower her as she's driving, but can't because the guy behind her keeps turning his high beams on when he would sit up. I lived in an old house, converted into a duplex, in Athens, Ohio, which is reported to be one of the most haunted American cities. During the first year I lived in my apartment, I frequently noticed this strange music that seemed to be coming from inside the house. It's hard to describe, but it sounded like a keyboard or an organ. It sounded faint and was played in the minor key, always sounded the same. Regardless, I just chalked it up to my downstairs neighbors, and it never bothered me enough to investigate. It was definitely coming from inside our building. And X200B. The following year, my original neighbors moved out, and my new neighbor, Sarah, moved in. We became friends. One night, she was hanging out in my apartment and the music started up. She asked me pointedly where the music was coming from, and I said I didn't know. She didn't have music playing in her apartment. She said no, and we both looked at each other uneasily. Sarah asked me if I ever saw or heard weird things, and I said that other than the music, I hadn't. The way she asked implied that she had, but she didn't want to talk about it. And X200B. A few months later, her BF moved in, and she later confided in me that she saw and heard things. Specifically random tendrils of what looked like smoke swirling inside their bedroom. Doors slamming or opening without explanation. Her BF hated going to the basement so much that he'd sing the whole time he was down there to do laundry. I hated the basement too because it hadn't been changed much since the house had been built, and there was a creepy room that looked like where you'd keep a sex slave. I guess it was where would have been stored. I always felt like I was being watched when I was down there. And X200B. I graduated and was getting ready to move. I went out of town for a few days, so my parents were watching my cat at their place a few hours away. The night I got back to Athens, I decided to start packing some of my books. The first items I'd packed. I fell asleep and woke up in the middle of the night to a giant crash. I was tired and disoriented, so I assumed the noise came from Sarah's place. The next morning, I went to my living room to find that a giant antique mirror hanging over my fireplace had crashed and shattered into hundreds of pieces. The nails supporting the mirror were intact, still in the wall. After that, I was finally prepared to admit that the place was haunted. I know Sarah saw and heard way more than she ever admitted, but she didn't like talking about it because she still lived there. She moved recently, so maybe I'll get more out of her now. I never really believed in ghosts, but too many unexplainable things happened. I never felt unsafe or like whatever was in the house wanted to hurt me or express anger, except maybe at my moving. This story isn't even that interesting, but that's how I found a lot of people's ghost stories to be. Not everyone has some vindictive poltergeist or whatever. And X200B. I did do some cursory research into who owned the house. I learned a woman was the original owner. Back then, the house was for a single family. She sounded like a quiet woman, a widow who died at an old age. In her obituary, I learned she loved to play music and had founded the Athens Music Appreciation Group. I wonder if I kept hearing her favorite song to play dart. Learn the melody to the song. It will be the key to opening the secret vault beneath the Music Appreciation Group's catacombs. This was a couple of years ago, but I still remember it vividly. It kind of happened in a dream. The dream itself wasn't that creepy. In fact, it was very pleasant. In my dream, I spent the day with my step-grandfather. He tried to teach me how to golf. We jogged together, and ended the day at his house. He needed help cleaning out his room up in the attic, and I was happy to help. As we were cleaning, though, I started to notice a theme between all the items we got rid of. Old baseball cards, baseball caps, his entire Stratomatic records. All of these things were very important to him. When I asked him why we were getting rid of these things, he just told me that he didn't need them anymore. It was about then that the dream ended. The creepy bit came when I woke up. That morning, my parents broke the news to me that my step-grandfather had passed away in his sleep. As for all the things he and I threw away in the dream, those were all given to us in his will. Not sure if paranormal or not, but I have a weird warning system that functions without any obvious triggers. For example, once I hiked through the forest to some old castle on a hill. To get there, I needed to cross a bridge that goes over a 20-meter deep canyon. I've been there 1,000 times, as I used to live in the area. This particular time I started to get a weird feeling as soon as I stepped into the forest. It got stronger and stronger until it was pure fear. I thought I must have eaten something wrong or so, because there was no reason whatsoever to be afraid. So I tried to ignore it and went on. Right before I stepped onto the bridge, that weird feeling acted up so wildly I almost turned back. Again, I convinced myself that I was being stupid and made it to the middle of the bridge. One has quite a nice view from that position into forest and the rock formations below. So as always I stopped and looked down to the right side of the bridge. Then I turned to the left. But before I could look down, that feeling didn't let me. At that point I really thought that I must go crazy, but still I obeyed. Didn't look down and made my way to the castle ruin complex that started right behind the bridge. Been there for 15 minutes, when some police officers arrived, started to scream at me to come down as I was climbing the old walls, interrogated me who I was, what I did there, who I saw on my way to the castle, how long I have been there, and how come I didn't see the dead guy under the bridge, on the left side. So apparently he jumped shortly before I arrived, and I guess they thought I was involved or a suicide buddy of him and was about to jump from the ruin walls. Turns out I can sense dead people, or whatever. I had a couple experiences with that warning system. Weird. Edit. Here's the German Wikipedia of those ruins. There's also pictures of the bridge. Wikipedia webpage. Edit 2. Some of you asked about other instances of my warning system. Here are 2 more. 1. I went for a walk outside my rural village. Parked my car at a parking spot for hikers and realized a guy was sitting in one of the parked cars, smoking a cigarette. He was in 40s I guess. Looked like a solid guy. Nothing creepy. Could have been my dad. So I get out of my car, start my walk among the fields, and again I have that super weird feeling telling me to go home. Again I'm arguing with myself. So in the distance I see a guy walking around, always parallel to me. That's it, I think. He's giving me the creeps. But he's so far away, there's no chance he could be a threat. I continue my walk, fighting that weird feeling until it becomes so urgent that it feels as if I'm walking against a resistance in the air or something. It was incredible. So I turn around, walk all the way back, checking on that guy in the distance from time to time. I was gone for 40 minutes probably, when I could see my car again between the trees. Also I see that figure is still there, doing something to my car. That's not good, especially because it's getting dark. He sees me coming, bolts to his car and drives off. My door handle was jizzed all over. 2. One evening I get, out of nowhere, a very strong urge to check on my friend. She lived in the basement flat of her parents' house and had been battling with some chronic infection. So I knew she wasn't very fit at that point. This super strong feeling that I should check on her is becoming urgent. This time I do not argue much. Her phone is constantly off. So I drive to her flat and knock on her door. No answer, but the door is locked. I'm a rather shy person. So if I get the slightest idea that I might be unwelcome, I will not stay. But this weird pushing feeling almost screams inside of me to get into that flat. So I knock and yell until I hear some movement. My friend somehow managed to drag herself to the door and unlock it. She had a severe toxic shock resulting from an undetected mold sensitivity. Turns out her flat was infested. I ran upstairs and fetched her dad. He had to literally pick her up and carry her up the stairs. No one told me she was in that state. She could go silent for days. Introvert. So this time my warning system was pushing me, not holding me back. Weird. Edit 3. Thank you for the gold. I've had the same warning system go off a few times. I always GTFO though, so never find out what it might have been warning me about semicolon. Once my wife woke me up in the morning to say goodbye as she was leaving for work. I had a very strong feeling that she shouldn't drive that day. I begged her to take the subway. She did. Later found out that there was a major accident on the road she takes on her daily commute. I read that as she died, and I was really sad for a minute. Glad she is okay. My wife and I spent a night at the haunted Hillview Manor. We captured the following scream on tape. No one around. No one else heard it. Scared me shitless. No explanation. Vocaroo voice message webpage. Happens at about 1:55. My great aunt, More, was in a nursing home about a year ago. Her husband, Paw, had died back in 2012. They have been together since she was 19. And she was in her 90s. We would visit and unfortunately watch her get worse. There was a nurse that took my mother aside and told her this may sound crazy, but I am a sensitive and there has been this man standing in the corner of the room watching her. When I see this usually means she doesn't have long. Maybe 2 days at most. My mom calls me, tells me about it and we rush to the nursing home to give her our goodbyes. After the last person visited her, she passed away. My grandfather recently passed away in his nursing home. We were with him when he died, and afterward, the nurses from the floor all came by to say their last goodbyes. One of the nurses told us that the day before, he was talking to someone that was in the corner of his room. She said he seemed so happy. It brought us a lot of comfort, thinking it was my predeceased grandma who he missed incredibly. I've heard this happens with not just beloved humans but beloved pets as well. Don't ask for a source BC, it was definitely in a random Reddit thread that I'll never find again. But people have talked about grandparents saying the names of their beloved cats, dogs or whatever that obviously predeceased them when they were in their final days. Something like Max's that you buy or along those lines. I remember I was camping one time with friends from high school. We had decided to sleep around the fire, not inside of tents, since it would be nice to sleep under the stars. I fell asleep in the chair after a while, but I woke up to very loud screaming from the forest surrounding the campground. It sounded exactly like a friend of mine who was sleeping right by me, and I didn't see him in his chair anymore. I woke up the person next to me asking where he went, and then my friend who I thought was screaming was across sleeping elsewhere on a bench. I then went to K and fell asleep immediately. The next morning I was asking people about the screaming and nobody else heard it but me, and I'm not sure what made it. Sorry if bad formatting. Using mobile. Could be a fox. They sound like someone being murdered. Cougars can make some terrifying calls too. I've heard so much shit in the woods that I thought was someone crazy, but 100% of the time it turned out to be an own thing. Some owls also have terrifying calls. Heard one once that sounded like a monster werewolf creature, but turns out it was just an owl. I was sleeping in my basement, pretty much my bedroom, and I woke up at some random time in the night for no reason. Rolled over and saw a black figure, probably around 5 feet 10 inches and typical male physique, standing at the side of my bed. It was standing between the bed and the stairs, so there was no way to knock out. I just rolled over and straight up started praying. I rolled back over and it was gone. The next morning I was in the shower, also in the basement, and the curtain was pushed to the side. Not like all the way, but it noticeably moved. Then when I got out of the shower, my cello's D string was plucked 3 times then wrung out, which was laying against my chair in the basement. Then I went upstairs and my brother had a handprint that reached across his neck and cheek. It was too big to be his hand, but he was perfectly fine and he slept through the night uninterrupted. Sometimes my old ass cat bites the lowy on my guitar at like 3 AM. Shit sounds like Big Ben gonging off in my fucking closet. It's terrifying. I am forever afraid that I'll roll over in bed and see a figure standing beside it. If it ever actually happens, I may never sleep again. When I was a kid, I woke up one Sunday morning. When I opened my eyes, a young girl was right next to my bed, her face a couple of inches away from mine. I let out a scream and she disappeared. She wasn't particularly scary looking, and I mainly screamed from the shock of waking up to an unfamiliar person next to me. I remember her clothes were kinda rolled and she was wearing a flat cap, like something out of Oliver Twist. I always figured it was just a hallucination or my brain being strange because I had just woke up. You know, stories like these make me think that ghosts are real and they are just so bored in death that they make a fun little hobby out of terrifying the living. I watched my cat from inside my house. Cat was sitting in the garden and looking in a different direction, as if looking for some birds to catch. I randomly thought, what if cats could hear thoughts, and immediately she turns around and looks me straight in the eyes from like 50-meter distance. I was pretty sure I didn't make any noise to get her attention. Anyways, I don't believe she heard my thoughts, lol. She probably heard some noise from that direction, but it was creepy AF. I mulled and tried to make this short. Unfortunately, my stories seem to grow like my beard as I get older, quickly and out of control. I'm sorry for the long read. And X200B. I've had a few things happen to me, but I'll share one that started with my dad and is still going today. And X200B. My dad grew up in rural Wisconsin. We're talking farms and forests for a few hours before you hit a city. In the 40s, when he was a boy, him and his brother would play in the countryside to their heart's content. One so place which happened to be a nearby property that their family rented for the fields, as the home lay abandoned. And X200B. And the home was special. Built before the Great Depression. It was a more southern style architecture in a Norwegian dominated area. Big open porch, 2 stories with a huge open stairwell and a massive southern facing bay window looking into the sitting room, which was to the left of the entryway. At the very bottom of the stairs, there was a piano that had been broken in half by some previous person. One half in one of the 3 upstairs bedrooms, the other half at the bottom of the stairs. And X200B. My dad and my uncle, in a few years apart, one just over 8 and the other 10. are playing in the bedrooms while my grandfather is in the nearby field prepping for harvest. My father was at the beginning of the hall, right at the top of the stairs, while my uncle was in the last bedroom, at the end of the hall. All of a sudden, the hair stood up on their arms and the backs of their necks. A violent laughter was heard throughout the house and someone played a full scale on the piano. My dad and uncle ran downstairs as quickly as they could. My grandfather, hearing the laughter from the field, ran to the house and literally ripped them from the doorway as they were trying to get out. And X200B. Later that night, my grandparents, dad and uncle, went back to the house. My grandfather lit 2 Molotov cocktails, throwing one into the open doorway and smashing the other on the porch. The flames spread for a second before there was the same laughter and the flames went out. And X200B. My family stopped renting that land. And X200B. 40 years later, my dad tells me this story. My grandparents verify it. And X200B. 5 or so years later, my girlfriend and I get a flat tire while on our way back from visiting some family in the North Woods. Exceptionally late at night, I hop out to change the tire and my girlfriend gets out. As we lived in Wisconsin, I carried a safety kit in the car, including thermal blankets and a large flashlight. As she's shining the light around, she says, "I see a house over there. Should we see if we can get help?" I looked up, following the trail from the flashlight to find my eyes resting upon a rare southern style two-story home with an open porch and big bay window. It looks abandoned but wholly untouched. The window is immaculate. And X200B. I immediately tell her to get in the car and start rushing the tire change. She can see the distressed look on my face and doesn't ask why. Just before she gets in the car, a few lone piano chords come out of the house. And X200B. I swear we drove a mile away with 3 bolts on the spare and then I pulled back over to finish the job. And X200B. As far as I know, that house is still there, just off a main county road in the North Woods of Wisconsin, waiting for someone to come find out what that piano is doing playing by itself. My partner and I were driving along a road and we see this shape in the middle of the road. It looks like it could be a kangaroo, but the closer we get to it the more human it looks, but kind of oversized. It is surrounded by a bunch of smaller shapes. We start to think maybe it's a giant bird, because it looks feathery, but it's definitely human shaped, but not quite. Like it had monstrous features. We're driving slower now, like walking speed, and I'm frantically telling my partner to drive around it and not leave the car, because that's how you get murdered. We see the little shapes closer and they are plastic chairs, surrounding a big ass scarecrow. Now you think knowing it's not an actual monster would help calm you down, but a friggin' scarecrow surrounded by small chairs in the middle of a quiet road at night doesn't ease any mood. We laugh about it now, but it freaked me the fuck out. Absolutely never get out of the car if you see anything weird like that. Could be a setup for kidnapping, carjacking. Sometimes, people park their cars across the road, other times staging an accident, and I remember one story on Reddit where a guy driving through California or New Mexico saw an accident and slowed down. Realized something was off about it, so he kept going, looked in his rearview mirror and saw the injured people start to get up and a few people emerge from the tall grass at the side of the road. I'm about to get my license soon, so I'll forever have this in the back of my mind. Sleep paralysis, or when I got sat on by a ghost while I was trying to sleep. Actually, very interesting thing to read about is a very similar vision people with sleep paralysis can have. It centers around waking up to find an old witch-looking creature sitting on your chest, restricting breathing. Many times people explain a very similar looking demon In accounts dating back in history, I've actually read a theory that Henry Fuseli's The Nightmare is a depiction of a similar experience. I'm not a superstitious person, but the fact that many people describe a similar being sitting on them freaks me out. I work at several attractions for the Big Mouse that has tourist destinations in Orlando and Anaheim. When I first started working for the Mouse, I learned that most of the buildings were haunted in one form or another. Generally, I take this stuff with a grain of salt. Show me the science or prove it to me, then I'll believe. I've had 2 separate encounters with 2 ghosts in 2 different attractions, and let me tell you, I believe a hell of a lot more now. Experience 1. In a slow-moving journey through time, you come across a scene where a famous painter is lying on his back, painting the ceiling of a building. There is a ladder going up to that scene, and the rumor was that a maintenance guy had a heart attack during his shift one night and dropped at the base of the ladder. No one found him until the next morning, and he was already dead. It became a tradition upon closing the ride for the night to tell him good night, or else havoc would come down upon the ride the next day. Silly, I know, but we all played along. I never really believed in it. Everything seemed very circumstantial. On one particularly slow day, I was riding through the attraction when all of a sudden it stopped in that scene I mentioned earlier. Now, if you've ridden this ride, you'll know that it's basically a train car with 2 rows. Well, as far as I could see ahead of me, there was no one. As far as I could see behind me, there was no one. The ride system is pretty sophisticated. When someone hops out, there are pressure-sensitive mats on one side that trigger the ride to stop and show on our ride display screen exactly where it is. On the other side of the ride vehicle, there are photoelectric beams that also give the exact location of this intrusion, as we call them. Now we stop this ride pretty often. Someone takes too long to get into the ride vehicle, stop it and then start it back up again. Well, in this case, they started speaking over the intercom into the entire ride. That usually means someone is out of the vehicle somewhere on the ride. A few minutes into sitting there, I start to hear keys jingling. 2 sets headed in my direction. I'm completely alone. And here come my fellow mouse employees, looking rather concerned. Iridescent song. Did you jump out? Of course, I hadn't. To which I told them. They look at each other, and back at me, both looking from the opposite directions they've come from. Did you see anyone? I hadn't. It was just me. The mat and the I-beam were both triggered in this scene. We all sort of stare at each other and sort of whisper the ghost's name at each other. They leave, and within 5 minutes, we are moving again. But I never rode alone again. Edit. RIP my inbox. Experience 2. Another attraction I work at is a motion simulator that spins and creates G-forces to simulate spaceflight. When the attraction first opened, there was only one option. The story goes that a mother brought her child in to experience the attraction, and when the attraction had finished, the child was unresponsive. Emergency services were called, and it was later discovered during the child's autopsy that he had an undiagnosed heart condition. This much is true. There is a fellow mouse employee that was working on that day and remembers the story. Multiple other mouse employees have looked up the story, myself included. Since then, it's been said that the ghost of that little boy likes to hang around in the ride room where he died. There are multiple reports of hearing him laughing during opening procedures, of him calling out for his mom, of the sensors going off before the ride starts and upon checking the cameras, there being stuff in front of it that definitely wasn't there before. Since we check all of the cameras before the ride starts, again, I'm usually very skeptical about this sort of thing. One morning, I'm scheduled an opening shift, which doesn't normally happen due to my low seniority. I show up and go to open ride room number 3, which is the room where this little boy met his tragic end. During opening checks, there is one person in each of the 4 rooms, all completing the same tasks. Ride rooms 1 and 2 are connected by a small closet, and ride rooms 3 and 4 are similarly connected by a small closet. We usually don't chat in the mornings with the person opening the other ride room since we are all trying to get through our checklist as quickly as possible. I get to the part where I am about to run the ride and check for errors at the end of my checklist and go in to start closing up my vehicles. It gets pretty loud in there, to the point where if we need to get someone's attention, we have to raise our voices. I start to check my ride vehicles and close the first 2 of 10. That's when I start gearing laughing. A little boy. At this point, I'm pretty sure it's one of the other openers playing a joke on me, so I move on. Go to check the next 2. They're good, so I close them. I hear the laughter again. Closer and louder this time. I turn around to check over my shoulder, and there's a faint flicker of movement from the corner of my eye. So I go to check and see what it is. There's nothing. At this point, I'm spooked. I hurry and check the rest of my ride vehicles, close them up, and do a final check of my ride room before closing everything up and setting the ride to start. I hear the giggling again. Turn around like last time, and there's a faint shimmer disappearing down the hallway. Of course I chase it to see what was there. Turns out to be nothing. Again. So I go to the other ride room to see who was opening over there. A girl that I've worked with before quite a bit. She normally opens, and tells me she's had similar experiences where it looks like someone is watching you, or just out of the corner of your eye and there's no one there, and that the laughing sometimes gets to be just downright creepy. Multiple people have encountered this little boy ghost at various times during the day, mostly under the conclusion that he's lonely. I copy-pasted this from the last time this was asked. That ride is scary and intense. I could see someone dying on it. I took my 7-year-old on it and had my hand on her the whole time to make sure she was okay. There were 2 other older girls next to me and I was half tempted to ask them if they were okay. But you know, it's almost impossible to even talk on that ride, let alone look like you're not losing your shit. If it's the ride I remember, that one was really intense and actually did feel like you were taking off to space. At a nursing home, working 10 p.m. to 8 a.m. First, I took care of 16 ladies as a CNA on night duty, on my own. The halls have 16 rooms, with a sister hall. Same layout, next door, only separated by a sliding door. There's a nurse that oversees the 2 adjoining halls but never saw her much, so it got lonely. As it was a nursing home, the ladies who live there are older and can get real sick real fast. One lady was sent to the hospital for pneumonia and was gone for days. One night, around 3 a.m., another lady, same hall neighbor to the lady at the hospital, started screaming, "Get him out of my room." Thinking a male resident had wandered from the other side of the building, I ran over to her room. But I didn't see anything. Now, this is a lady who is very with it and never has behaviors or hollers out. But she is hysterical. I figure she had a bad dream and try to calm her down. It took about 15 minutes. When I leave her room, the nurse is on the phone. The lady at the hospital had died 15 minutes ago. There are ghosts that walk the halls, and dark forms I see in certain corners of certain halls. So I guess I was never really alone. I worked in memory care for 2 years on night shift and experienced all sorts of odd things. At the first place I worked at, doors would randomly open or slam shut for no reason. You would hear footsteps when no one was around, and there were regular sightings of a tall, dark shadowy man. One of the residents actually saw this shadow man regularly. She was supposedly crazy, but most of us believed her. At the next place I worked at, I saw this shadow figure, but it was weird, like I was seeing a memory in real life. It was only sort of there. Night shift sucks. This reminds me of a story told in one of these threads. The OP worked in a hospice ward or something similar, and one older dementia patient would constantly talk to her husband Joe. He died a while ago, and this was attributed to her illness and seemed harmless. Now one time, late at night, another patient starts complaining about a man in her room. This woman wasn't known for seeing things. The nurses did their best to calm her, but whenever they left, she'd start complaining about the man again. Finally she yelled at the chair in the corner, "Leave me alone, Joe." Complaining lady died later that morning or something like that. I am now convinced that the older these ladies get, the stronger their supernatural powers become. Joe's wife was probably tired of hearing that woman's nagging, so she sent Joe to perform a post-mortem assassination on her. If that isn't eternal love, I don't know what is. I had a span of time where multiple things happened to me. Not much since I am in college now, but here it goes. Here are a few stories. Some are related, and all happened at the same house. When I was in 6th grade, my friend was over my house and we were taking turns playing the PlayStation. I was lying on my bed as it was his turn. The lights were out, and it was about midnight at this time. As I'm laying there, I notice from my left peripheral that there is someone there. I see a face. All white face with blacked out eyes and quite similar to what Michael Myers' mask looks like, but no hair. This face started to slowly turn in and look at me, getting closer and closer. I jumped up quickly and turned the light on, and then there was nothing. I was freaked out for the rest of that night. A few years later, I believe I was in high school. I was playing Xbox and my mom was sitting on the computer. I was playing COD Zombies and she was playing a dice game, so I can be certain this wasn't from that. Both of us heard this very loud man say, "I'm home," so I'm home but dragged out. We both just looked at each other wondering what the hell just happened. Later that night my mom was in her room just petting one of our cats. As she was petting him, she was just saying, "Hi Vaddy. His name is Vader." After she said this, she said that someone mimicked back to her hi, almost as if she was being mocked. A few months later, once Halloween approached, we had seen something else. We had our house all decorated and it looked pretty scary. Scary enough that I decided to use my uncle's camera to take a picture of our house. Upon further inspection of the picture, I noticed something quite scary. I zoomed in on our door. We have a glass door that opens first before the main door, and saw within the glass a face. It had human characteristics, however the eyes were blacked out. Very similar to the thing I saw when I was younger. Edit. My family visited me and I had my uncle bring his camera. Here is a link to check them out. We had 2 tiki torches and 1 outdoor light. Other than that, there were no other light sources. Apparition album on the web page. This incident happened to my aunt and uncle, who are very straight-laced, wholesome Christian types. It was the mid-90s and they had just been married. They were looking for their first place together and were on a budget as both had just gotten out of college. They found an apartment that was affordable and made an appointment to check it out. When they arrived, they noticed the apartment building was adjacent to an old cemetery. The woman showing the place mentioned that previous tenants had mentioned strange activities in the apartment. Drawers being opened, doors slamming shut, but overall the incidents were few and infrequent. If you believe in that sort of thing, They didn't think much of it and they weren't the spooky type, being Christians, and also they went ahead and got their first place. She said as soon as they got in the apartment they noticed things being moved, drawers opening and closing, items gone missing or moved. She said there were incidents almost daily but that they just tried to ignore it. The third or fourth day they were in their new place, my aunt had just showered and had crawled in bed next to her hubby as he had showered before her. For your information, my uncle usually leaves the room when my aunt recounts this story as it's too creepy for him. So my aunt had just crawled into bed. My uncle was above the covers reading the paper. She was exhausted and closed her eyes to start relaxing before sleep. She says her husband then turns to her not saying a word and starts giggling and poking at her like a playful kid kinda thing, then starts grabbing her arms and legs. Sort of play wrestling if you will. "What are doing?" she exclaimed, to which he didn't reply. She also said he had an odd look on his face that she'd never seen and it was just out of character. He then rolled off the bed manically giggling and rolled under the bed and started pushing up on the box spring from under the bed. She described it as almost taunting. Then in a loud voice she yells his name and asks again, "What are you doing, Dart?" She then hears my uncle's voice say, "What is it?" She hops up and finds her hubby in the living room, feet kicked up, reading his paper. They immediately packed a few things and went to a hotel. They never spent another night there and got out of the lease and only returned with family and friends to pack up. I was in my room on the second floor, and I saw a girl, which I thought was my sister, in the hall walk past my room into my sister's room. Then I went to go ask her a question assuming my sister would be in her room, but when I turned out of my door her room was empty and had the lights off. I went downstairs to find her in the kitchen, and when I asked if she was upstairs at all she told me she had been in the kitchen the whole time. Well, that's better than my experience. Last night I heard somebody clap above my head while I was in the shower, which I promptly responded with "What the hell?" and that's about the most paranormal thing to ever happen to me, SMH. When I was in HS, my little friend's parents would let me stay overnight on the weekends so long as I slept in their RV that was parked in back of the house. I had done it multiple times. My girlfriend would come sit outside with me for a while until she got tired, and then she would go inside to fall asleep and I would listen to my Walkman while I tried to fall asleep. I remember one night I was having trouble falling asleep, which wasn't so unusual for me. But as I lay there I started to notice an unfamiliar background sound noise, and when I removed my headphone I realized that it sounded like people outside the RV were having a loud discussion. But the number of voices started to multiply and get louder and louder until it was unbearable. I searched round and round, peering out the windows, but nobody was there. I was very shaken at this point and I decided to run into the house and sleep in the living room and try to explain myself in the morning. Problem was, every time I got about 6 feet away from the RV there would be a flash of white and I would open my eyes and find myself back in the RV. Now I was nearly having a panic attack, so I called my girlfriend on the phone and she could hear how terrified I was, so she told me she was coming outside to get me. I heard the backsliding door of her house open. I heard her walk across the deck, down the steps, across the garden stones, and finally her hand fumble on the RV door. But when it swung open and no one was there, now I was pretty much in tears when suddenly felt the presence of something behind me. I turned around and found this massive red aura hovering there, and I was overcome with this immense sense of death and dread, and I felt like I couldn't breathe, like I was being strangled. I remember feeling like this aura energy was killing me, like absorbing my life force, if that makes any sense. I dropped to my knees and realized that if I didn't break free real fast I was most certainly going to die. I don't know where I found the strength from, but I willed myself back to my feet and slammed the RV door open and bolted for the house. This time I actually got inside. I hollered for my girlfriend and she came downstairs with her mom to much confusion. I explained everything that had happened, getting especially angry that my girlfriend never came outside like she promised. She said that we never spoke on the phone and she had no idea what I was talking about. But when we compared our phones, mine showed a 125 conversation completed to phone while hers showed nothing. That's when her and her mom started taking me seriously and began to look quite scared themselves. The rest of the night was uneventful. Her mom let me try to sleep on the couch, but try as I might I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes I would see a small circle of intensely burning white light. Dude, it sounds like Lucifer himself came to take you away but you survived somehow, holy shit. Honestly at the time that's what I believed, although I honestly wasn't, and am still not, very religious. It's hard to rationalize what happened that night. It was nearly 11-12 years ago, and when that kinda time goes by you want to believe you're remembering it wrong. And while I want to dismiss certain details because they seem so ludicrous, I cannot explain how my phone showed a picked up phone call that lasted nearly 130 minutes. This is so weird. So I don't know how, but I totally forgot about this happening to me, but reading your story brought it back. Last month I called my wife on her cell and we had a normal conversation. Nothing out of the ordinary. She asked me what time my mom's b-day dinner was at the end of the call. I get home a few minutes later and she asks me what time my mom's b-day dinner was. I said, you just asked me this on the phone. It's at 6. Her reply was that we didn't talk on the phone. Pulled out my phone and sure as hell there is a few minute long conversation. Her phone had nothing. It was really bizarre. Don't know how I forgot about that. I actually find this story way more intriguing than my own because there was nothing scary going on. Just a regular conversation that got trapped in time between dimensions. I do genuinely believe in the multiverse parallel dimension school of thought, and having a few of my own Mandela effect experiences makes me wonder if these experiences are more on that level than some kinda holy demonic force. This is the story that'll make me shut this thread. Easily the scariest, my dude. You know, there was a similar thread like a year or two ago and I recounted the same story and I guess it got buried because no replied, and it left me feeling like my experience wasn't as scary as it felt to me when it was happening. I'm glad it got some visibility this time. I'm feeling a bit justified by reaction to those events as they unfolded. I was on call at a hospital, med student, and as I was going to leave for the night, I walked the long, empty hallway to return my pager. As I returned down that hall, I stopped in my tracks when I noticed a woman limping down the hall toward me, sobbing and crying, "Help me." Mind you, it was 2 AM and no one should be in that part of the hospital. Anyway, I thought she was a ghost. She wasn't. She fell off a stripper pole and hit her head. In her fugue state, she stole a key card and meandered into the halls from the ED. When I was 11 or 12, I was in my room listening to my parents arguing upstairs. I was so mad, because they were always fighting and at the time I just wished they'd divorce. So I was standing with my back to the wall, facing my bed. Suddenly all my anger turned into this primal terror. Fight or flight kicked in. I had no idea what I was running from, but I ran for my bed. Or at least I tried to. I only made it a couple steps before I saw a wisp of black shadow out of the corner of my eye, and felt something grab a fistful of my hair. Since I was running, it caused my head to be yanked backwards, so I was looking at the ceiling. I recovered pretty quickly and made another dash for my bed, where I stayed until I built up the courage to leave my room. A lot of paranormal things happened in that house, but that was the scariest for me. I also worked at a chemical plant a couple years ago as a cleaner. People died out there sometimes. One guy actually within a month of me starting there. There were rumors of certain buildings being haunted. On my third day, first day working alone, I was cleaning the basement of my assigned building. It was very quiet down there. People rarely came down, but you would always hear if someone was there because everything echoed loudly. On this day I was down there alone. I dragged some of my supplies from the janitor's closet over to the women's washroom, turned on the bathroom light, put up my sign and went for more supplies. When I got back to the washroom, the light had been switched off. I thought I must have bumped it on my way out, so I switched it back on and made sure to keep my distance the next time I walked out. Came back to find the light again switched off. The basement already had this creepy feeling, so I was a little spooked. I thought someone must have been trying to prank the new girl, but it was weird that I didn't hear anyone walking around. I mentioned it to a couple co-workers later and they immediately told me my building must be one of the haunted ones. I'm a pretty big believer of the paranormal, but I always try to find a logical explanation before jumping to that. But since I've had so many things happen I can't explain, I decided to download a Ghostbox app on my phone. I decided to try it out at work a few weeks later. I waited until I was cleaning the women's washroom in the basement before opening the app, put in my headphones and started asking generic questions like, is anyone here? I kept hearing the same thing come through over and over. It sounded like Ellen or Helen. I kept cleaning, just listening to the ghost box and not talking. I moved on to the shower. As I was standing in front of it about to step in and clean it, Helen is in the shower came through clear as day and louder than anything had before that. Noped out of there so fast and it was almost a month before I could bring myself to clean that washroom again. I've got more stories if anyone wants them. My mom and I visited my grandma at her senior home and left at like 10 p.m. I went out the front doors and bumped straight into this dude's chest. I said sorry and backed away, but when he didn't respond I felt a bit weirded out and looked up to see this huge tall middle-aged dude. I think he was like 7, with a black fedora and black suit and really wide eyes and a briefcase. He had huge wide eyes, and he kept staring at me without blinking or saying a word. Then my mom called for me to hurry up and follow her to the car. When we got in the car I asked her who she thought that man was. She said what man? I explained what literally just happened and she said she didn't see any man. I turned around and the dude was gone. Creepiest thing that's ever happened to me. Edit. Everyone here is saying I bumped into death. I never thought about that before. I thought it was just some weird dude who somehow quietly got in the door even though it has a welcome beep. But I guess it was at a senior home and it's right next to a cemetery, so it makes sense. And now I feel even more creeped out by this memory. Thanks everyone. I'd like to imagine you bumped into death. He was shocked that you could see and touch him. Speechless. He realized that you will eventually be his replacement. What should he do? What will happen to him when he is replaced? Should he train you? Should he kill you? Could he finally have companionship in his duties? Perhaps even a friend? So much rushed through his head. Then you turned away and left. You stared death in the eyes and won, my friend. Super weird experience though. Happy they didn't continue. I've told this story before, but it was a while ago and I'm too lazy to just go copy paste it. When I was in college, my friends group was rather big, 10 or so of us, and we always went to lunch together at the cafeteria across campus every day, outside of the atrium which we had to go through to get the cafeteria. There are bushes running alongside the pathway, so we're walking to lunch in groups of 2. There were 4 or 5 in the first group and 4 of us, including me, in the trailing group. The first group walks between the bushes and keeps going. But as soon as my group walks between the bushes we all kinda just stop. The most uneasy feeling just fucking washes into me and I'm a bit disoriented. The other guys felt it too, then it kinda hits us all at once that someone is missing. But we can't remember who or anything about them. We do a count and we're all there, but we all are swearing there was one more person that's now just gone. We catch up to the first group and ask them and they have no idea what we're talking about. It's one of the weirdest things to ever happen to me. I believe in the supernatural but I take an incredibly skeptic view to it. But I can't explain that. Also, in that same area, a lamppost just appeared overnight one time. No one in the group could remember it being there and we walk that way every single day. The group I was with when whoever it was disappeared took the long way around from then on out. I avoided that area like the plague. Well, for the lamppost I'm a civil engineer and you can easily install those things in an hour or so depending on the foundation, so maybe your city was just doing some night work. I truly look forward to these threads. Thank you sincerely for posting. I have been waiting to tell this story for ages. No one believes me but my sister remembers it just as vividly as I do. I'm 32 now and this happened when I was 13. I grew up in the backwoods of Texas. I'm talking there was a huge forest behind our acre of land, and it belonged to the National Preserve. That kind of backwoods. Well, my sister who was 8 at the time wanted to go walking in the woods. Something we did frequently. Somehow we always knew where we were even if we walked for an hour. We always knew how to get back home. It was weird, but I digress. We yell that we're going in the woods and my mom yells back at us to come in before dark. Yada yada parent stuff. Before we set off, we had built a makeshift fort a few hundred feet in and decided to check it out. We got bored of that pretty quick and decided to just walk and pick up sticks, etc. We're a good 30 minutes into our walkabout when I notice it's getting darker. I start to ignore it when my sister hits my arm. Up ahead through the dense foliage and trees we see what looks like a clearing. Now I knew this part of the woods well and I knew we were still on preserve land and there weren't any clearings that should be nearby. Thinking maybe it's just the sunlight illuminating a spot, I convinced my sister to check it out. It turned out to be a clearing. The sky was still pretty dark and the wind had picked up to a breeze because I remember the tall grass rustling. However, we had stopped in our tracks because in the middle of the clearing was a 2-story house. There was no driveway nor a road that led to it. That's the first thing we checked as we went around the perimeter of the clearing. We were a bit terrified of the house and thought maybe we had gotten lost and there was a road nearby. But as I said nothing. There wasn't even a worn path to the house. We went back to the original spot we came out of the woods from and just stared. I remember being full of absolute dread, but I couldn't seem to turn back and go home. The house itself looked old but well kept, but there was no road. My sister's holding my hand at this point and we're still just standing there staring. It's starting to get darker and darker. Then my eyes go to one window on the top right part of the house. There's a flickering light on and there's something rocking back and forth. It blots out the light when it rocks one way, but then when it rocks the other way you can see the light. My sister then squeezes my hand so tight my fingers went numb. That jarred me out of my stupor and I tell her to let go and look down at my hand trying to shake her off. That's when she starts crying and says it's waving high. I remember I literally started shaking at that point. I look up and sure enough there's an arm up now rocking opposite of the body in a wave-like gesture. I was done at that point and pull her hand that's still clawing mine and hightail it out of there. We run a good 10 minutes before making it to our fort, which confused the hell out of me. We had walked a lot further. The sky was starting to get brighter, but I still wanted to get out. We caught our breath and then began running again until we got home. My sister and I had stopped crying by this point, but my mom, who I swear to God had some kind of mind-reading powers, asked what was wrong. My sister tells her and I get in trouble for making up stories and scaring her. I storm off and we just ignore it after that. I remember it occasionally throughout the years, and every time I remember it I get a sense of dread and nearly start shaking. Fast forward to 2 years ago. My dad passed away and I'm at my mom's house consoling her and grieving as well with her and my sister. Randomly we start talking about how my dad loved horror movies, etc., and I remember that day in the woods so vividly I nearly start shaking again. Later that night, after my mom's asleep, I ask my sister about it. As soon as I say that house in the woods, she immediately freezes up. I ask her if and what she remembers, and she describes it in exact details as I remember it. Then she said she had asked our dad a few years back about it, since he grew up here as well and knew more about the area's history. He laughed at her, saying there's nothing back there but woods for miles. Yet her and I both remembered it so vividly it feels like it just happened every time we remember it. The next day I decide to go back into the woods and check it out. I spent half a day out there and found absolutely nothing but woods. To this day I still can't explain what the hell we saw. Edit for spelling words. Not me, but my mom. She grew up in a ranch house in Colombia that used to be some kind of epidemic ward. When she was little, she and one of her sisters saw little white gowns floating around their bed at night. They were obviously terrified and fought against sleeping in that room so fiercely that my grandmother actually had a priest come and bless the room to set their minds at ease. After that, no more floating gowns. I wrote this in another post, but it applies here as well. When I was in high school, I'd have my then girlfriend over to my house almost every day. Every night I'd have to drive her home. And since I was like 16, I had the whole no driving after 9 o'clock thing, so I'd drive her home at like 8:30 and get back on my road at around 9 o'clock. Whenever I'd turn off onto my road, I'd go up it about half a mile and see this girl, like a teenager, in a blue dress with a light blue ribbon tied around her waistline. Walking down the road, it was around fall, and she was barefoot and grinning ear to ear with mascara stains running down her face from some heavy duty crying. I told my then girlfriend the story, and she didn't really believe me. It happened the next 3 nights, and each time I just stared at her, my heart beating hard in my chest. I never stopped to see what was the deal. Who in their right mind would? The 4th night I waited until 10:00 to bring my girlfriend home. Then when I turned onto my road, I pulled out my phone to film the rest of the trip. I didn't see anything, and I haven't seen her since. I have a few. I guess I'll tell the haunted apartment story though, since it's the most comprehensive. This was during college. On Halloween I took a pendulum to an old battlefield with my friends to try to communicate with spirits or whatever. All in good fun. After that night, crazy shit started happening to me at my apartment. The first sign was my keys continuously went missing. I'd unlock the door, set my keys down, go about my business, and then they would just be gone. Even when I was alone in the house, I enlisted my friends once to search the entire house. We looked under my mattress, moved all the furniture, dug around in the couches. I had about 4 sets of keys go missing. Then my door started slamming. I'm a skeptical person, so I tested everything. I checked the hinges, opened and shut the front door to see if the airflow triggered it. Nothing. My bedroom door would just slam shut on me every so often. I left for a week on vacation. When I came back, my picture of Jesus I kept on my dresser was on the floor, face down. There were stabs all over his face, like someone just poked holes all through it. I took a storytelling class. Our assignment was to tell a ghost story. So as I was practicing in the dining room, alone, a full water bottle that was sitting on the island flung itself off the table violently. I had a friend move in with me, and after that, all the weird stuff stopped. Epilogue: it was my final day at my apartment. I had all my friends over as a final farewell to the first year of college. One of my friends was like, "What's this? There's something in your couch," and he pulled out a set of my keys. Everyone immediately started feeling around the couch and every set of missing keys was in my couch. It's like my poltergeist was saying goodbye as well. My picture of Jesus I kept on my dresser was on the floor, face down. There were stabs all over his face. I don't think I would return to the apartment after this. So, this doesn't fit into the paranormal aspect, but it definitely fits into the creepy, genuinely terrifying aspect. When I was a teenager, I was a camp counselor at a summer camp in the rural countryside with no real phone reception except 2 landlines. Cabins had no power. Really isolated spot. The year was 2011. For those that don't remember, that was the summer Anders Breivik went to a summer camp and killed nearly 70 campers and counselors after his first attack. So, in short, we were all on edge by a lot, telling scary stories. That summer was full of next. One of the night jobs as a counselor was to go and check cabins and the bathrooms to make sure all the kids were accounted for, sleeping and such. On this particular night, the power had blown. Something cut it and we're in the middle of the woods, so it's basically pitch black, save for the flashlights. The bathrooms were the worst to check. You'd have to pull back all of the shower curtains to make sure none of the kids had done the unthinkably grim and hung themselves. It happened once in the past apparently, and thus we have to check. So anyway, I'm off doing my round and I hear the sounds of things moving in the woods, which generally isn't abnormal for small animals at night. But this was big, like large person movement. Throw the flashlight in that direction and nothing is there. Kept walking. 30 feet later it's back. Still nothing there. Get to the bathroom and make my way to the shower side. There's a pair of legs in one of the showers. Closed curtain. Pitch black. So, I'm pretty much terrified at this point, but I'm like, welp, it's the job. I call out, get no response. So my fear went from a solid 9/10 to about 47/10. Pull back the curtain and there's a fellow counselor standing there full asleep, walking, staring at me. Turns out he beelined it through the woods from his cabin somehow. So yeah, camp was an experience. Posted this a few years back in a similar thread. Didn't get much traction at the time. Happened back when I was around 11 or 12, so 14 years ago now. Parents and I moved from a small town to the city and we got a great deal, apparently, on a house on a hill with a great view. I remember the day we were moving in, the previous renters, mom and son, kid was close to my age, were just finishing moving out, and I'll always remember the look on the mother's face as just being unsettled to say the least. Anyways, fast forward a few weeks ahead, we had everything set up at this point, and the way the couch was set up in the living room, you could see the hallway to my parents' room as well as to the laundry room out of the corner of your eye. I shit you not, almost every single time I'd be watching TV or playing games, out of the corner of my eye I'd see this shadow going back and forth between the two rooms almost constantly, whizzing back and forth. My dad said the same thing sometime later, as he didn't want to freak the shit out of his little kid. That was mainly the extent of it for some time, but it was all the time. I got used to it as best you could and sort of thought it's my buddy, the ghost shadow. I remember talking to it out loud and constantly asking it to not scare me if it could. So that was fine, lived with it for the time being. Time passed over 6 months to a year. My parents got divorced. Dad left to live elsewhere and I stayed there with my mom because it was an unreal deal apparently. My mom used to work at a restaurant and I stayed at home alone until 11 PM usually. One night it was around 10 PM, and I was watching TV and I just had a weird sense of being watched. Deeply. That hair standing on the back of your neck feeling etc. And all of a sudden, almost instantaneously as I got that feeling, I looked to the window. You know when you can see someone in the reflection of a window? Well, it was that. Except in the reflection all I saw was a shadow inside the room about 7 or 8 feet behind me. These panes of glass were huge too. So I saw what looked like to me a silhouette of a human. I looked for what seemed like a long time but could have only been a few seconds, and then I looked away to comprehend WTF I just saw. I didn't move and didn't take my eyes off the TV until my mom got home because I sure as shit didn't want to see anything else. My mom's experience was a bit more startling. She didn't tell me until I was older as she didn't want to add to any terrified feelings of myself being home alone. I was at my dad's for the night and she was sitting on the same couch that I was when I saw the shadow. Apparently, using her words, a lady of shallot picture lifted off the mantle of the fireplace, which was in the living room, stood midair for a split second, and fell to the floor, glass down. I remember the night because my mom called my dad and we had to go visit mom late at night, and my parents stayed in bed together as I assumed my mom was scared shitless. We eventually found out, to our surprise, that the original owner of that house was the then landlord's uncle. He was apparently very disgruntled towards women, and where we would constantly see the shadow whizzing back and forth between laundry room and hallway was the area that he had his workshop before they remodeled that area of the house. We also found out that he was found dead in the house right next to the area where I apparently saw the shadow. On another twisted note, when we were moving out of the house, the landlord asked my mom in front of me, "So, did you see him?" When I was a child I had a small wooden rocking chair in my room. I don't remember ever actually using the thing, but my parents decided it was a good enough decoration to have when we moved to our new house when I was a child. I remember feeling strange in this new house at night. The hot cold cheek feelings they tell you about with paranormal stuff, ghosts, etc. The feeling of being watched was pretty present, too. Well, a few years after moving into this house, I had been sitting up on my bed reading, when out of nowhere, music started playing. I looked over to see this little wooden rocking chair rocking. Apparently it had a music box in the back of it I never knew about. I ran out of the room to my parents screaming, who laughed at me and told me you must have hit it playing around. Except I know I was on the bed the whole time, and the thing started moving by itself. I don't believe in the paranormal, but that one experience is enough for me to at least give ghosts a second thought. TLDR. As a child had a wooden rocking chair that moved by itself and played music. This isn't as creepy, and quite frankly I don't believe in ghosts or the supernatural, but my scientific mind can't explain an encounter I had with a Reiki master that was supposed to help me with my back. I have a heavy chest, and so my mom recommended I see a friend of hers that used energy to heal muscles, the expense being paid by my mom. I went, cause I mean I'll at least get a massage out of it. Now, the lady was incredibly attentive and friendly, sitting me down and asking me questions about what hurt and where. and I don't know what happened, but I all of a sudden got so sick. I ran out her office and into the bathroom and threw up there repeatedly for like 20 seconds, and then all the shit that hurt kind of just dissipated. I felt so good after I quite literally threw up nothing. And when I returned, the lady just smiled at me and started the massage. I left that place feeling a new woman, without a pain in my back. I cannot explain what the hell happened. I don't believe in spirits or God or anything, but that encounter has made me open for debate and questioning. I will never forget her, and quite frankly, if given the chance, I'd love to understand what she did to me that day. That kind of power frightens and excited me at the same time. I was 8 years old on Christmas Eve and lived on the 3rd floor of a large house that was converted into apartments. I had trouble falling asleep. I saw a boy floating outside my window wearing one of those old beanie hats with the propeller on top. I threw the covers over my head and eventually fell asleep. The next morning my parents told me that they saw a figure of a small boy sitting at the end of their bed and asked if it was me, which it was not. A few years later, we had some plumbing work done and they had to tear up the floorboards. An old book was found that had pictures of the property from about 60 years prior. There was a picture of the boy I saw in there, and it turns out that he was shot during a hunting accident on the property and died. Still freaks me out to this day. Not creepy, maybe paranormal, maybe coping mechanism. Anyone that smokes marijuana every day will tell you that it's rare to remember your dreams. Sometimes you'll remember glimpses of them, but most of the time it's usually a black screen when you try to remember. My mother passed away 9 years ago, and at the time that she passed away I had been smoking weed every day all day for a couple years. I didn't dream much. After she died, my dad and little brother and I moved to a smaller apartment. First night I slept there, I had a dream in that new apartment. There was a knock at the door and I opened it to find my mom smiling and at peace. I led her through our new apartment, giving her a tour. She was nodding and smiling along the way, and the last I remember when I finished the tour was her smiling and saying she was happy for us, and this was a good place for us. And I woke up. I woke up in tears. Happy ones. Miss you Mom. The 26th of September 2009. And X200B. This hasn't happened to me, but to my cousins I'm close with down in South Carolina. Jesse's the youngest one, just turned 5. He wasn't born yet when Grandma Moji passed away almost 10 years ago. And there are 1 or 2 pictures in their house of her, so that's the only way he knows what he looks like. And he just knows she's Grandma Moji also. Cousins' parents really don't mention or speak about Grandma because it was just so long ago. So Jesse was talking to himself and playing with some toys one day, and his other grandma asks, "Who are you talking to?" Jesse explains he's playing with Grandma Moji, that she's very nice and sweet and he likes to play with her. This happens again within the next few days. "She talks to you?" "Yes, she plays with me and she's really nice. I like Grandma Moji." Next week, other grandma asks casually again about Grandma Moji while her and Jesse are in the car. "So is she here with you now, Jesse?" He goes, "No, she's up there in the sky." I'm waiting to hear more on this story. I believe he's actually seeing her, and I don't think it's just a game. He has a big imagination, but he's a realistic kid and says things straight how it is. I was in college and had went to bed while everyone else was in the living room smoking and drinking. My roommate brought his dog up from his parents' house that weekend. I feel something nuzzle into bed with me. I think it's his dog. It's pushing against me harder against my back. So I turn around to grab what I think was a dog. To my surprise, I grabbed something cold that has the perfect shape of a ball. I freak the fuck out and throw it out of my bed. The ghost Kamehameha ball hits my arm, breaks it and disappears. I run out of my room in my boxers and yell at my roommates, "You guys, WTF are you trying to do to me in my sleep?" Everyone's confused, so I explain the only reason people believe me is the broken lamp. I don't believe in ghosts or the paranormal, so this one freaked me out. My parents own a 300-acre ranch in George West, Texas. My stepdad and mother are going out of town for a week and ask me to look after the animals. I decide to spend the week there in the guest house and make myself comfortable. Now this ranch is in the middle of nowhere and the nearest neighbor is probably like 10 miles down the road. One night I finish feeding the cows and decide to take a walk in the woods behind the cow pen. It was probably like 2300-ish and I'm scanning the woods with a flashlight and just walking. I remember taking my phone out because I had thought I felt it vibrate. Phantom vibration. The screen reads 2323, but there is no signal. Okay, whatever. Seconds later I hear what sounds like a woman singing a lullaby. I freak the fuck out and become paralyzed due to shock. I cock my shotgun. Always had it with me in case snakes or coyotes. Scan the woods with flashlight in hand. I don't see anything, but the singing is getting louder. I ran out of there like a little girl and went back to the guest house. Never found out what it was. Probably best that you don't. Never trust anything that sings from the darkness, especially if it's a lullaby. Sorry for the weird questions. Could you tell if the singing was in English, Spanish, or did it sound sort of not human at all? Sounded like Old English. Lady or whatever the fuck it was had one of those opera voices. My uncle died due to a heroin overdose 2 years ago, and he was always super playful. Like a prankster I guess, and would mess with people. Like when I'm taking warm shower he would pour ice cold water onto me. Every so often when I'm taking a warm shower and no one else is around, the water would turn freezing cold for a split second and come back. And there's nothing wrong with the water heater since it only happens to me and no one else. I did take a lot of his stuff and put it into my room. Like his posters, street signs, etc., and every so often they would just fall off their hooks and fall onto the ground. And I have our street hanging right above my head where he has his, and it landed right next to me one night and it scared me. There are multiple other times like those, but this one time really scared me. When my dad wanted me to help him with making an outlet in the basement, he needed some tools from the garage and I went over to grab them. Trying to look through the mess that it is, the lights start to flicker. After a while I got the idea to say "F off Phil, I'm helping dad," and they would stop for a minute. And then they would come back and I would say the same thing. Before long I would say louder, "Phil, please stop. You're scaring me, I don't like this," and it stopped and didn't happen again. My husband's house has always been super creepy. When I moved in at 17, I didn't believe shit was as crazy as his family let on. Boy, so his bedroom door lines up directly with the living room. If you were to sit in the middle of the living room with a flashlight, you could shine it right into his room where he would be sleeping. Well, I was the one in his room, in his bed, asleep, and he was on the couch, passed out. I wake up, eyes closed still, to the sound of someone hitting the armrest of the couch. It was a hollow but sort of cloth sound that I could only mimic by hitting the couch. Then it looks like someone is turning a flashlight on and off in front of my face. Still half asleep, eyes closed because I didn't want a flashlight in my face. I, annoyed, yelled out to my husband, "Babe, what are you doing?" No response. My eyes shoot open. No flashlight. Couch sound keeps happening, but I can clearly see my husband is asleep. I drew my feet up to my chest and look around the dark room. "Babe," I yelled, and he shot up, looking to the kitchen where I hear one final loud bang and my husband jumps up. He starts asking me what was going on, how long I had been awake, WTF is in the house. He told me he thought I was fucking with him until he heard me yell. When he finally got up, he looked into kitchen and all of the cabinets were at various stages of being opened and they all slammed shut at once, along with a loud bang against our back door. I never believed in that shit before, but you bet your ass after all of that I saged the shit out of the house and salted all of the doors and windows. Fuck all of that. Cut a long story short, I was having a lot of problems with a woman I was working with and her bullying was really getting to me. I told a friend about it and she suggested I visit a botanica. I'm Catholic, so I've always been open-minded to things like Santeria and Kimbanda. I figured there was little to lose. If nothing else, it would make me feel better. The guy at the botanica sold me a special candle, oil and herbs. He prescribed me a 9-day ritual which involved bathing in herbs whilst saying certain Catholic prayers, burning the candle at certain times of day whilst reading psalms from the Bible and dabbing the oil on a photo of the woman I'd printed off of Facebook. The idea was to cut her out of my life. There were other specifications, but I won't go into it here. About a week after completing the 9-day ritual, the woman left my place of work. She just didn't show up one day and never came back. In the following days I heard several rumors about her having non-specific problems, the implication being some sort of mental health problem or family tragedy. I never saw her ever again. Still gives me chills when I think about it. I did a love spell once. There was a guy I was chasing. We'd broken up but I always pined for him. So I made a wax figure of him and burned it. The instructions said you were supposed to watch the smoke and tell it to come to you. Cracks me up that I even tried it. He showed up that night and was asking why we ever broke up in the first place. He broke up with me again soon after. I guess my spell wore off. Or maybe he doesn't like women who do spells. I guess I would consider this paranormal but probably more creepy. When I was 20 I was pretty lazy, didn't have a job etc. I would spend all night up watching movies or being online. My computer was in our finished basement. I would usually go to sleep at 8 AM and then wake up at 5 or 6 PM. That was my schedule. It would usually be dark by the time I woke up. One night, I had a dream that I woke up and went down to my computer and turned the basement light on only to have the light go out as soon as I hit the switch. When I woke up I brushed it off but had the dream in the back of my mind too as I made my way downstairs. As I flipped the switch, the light went out, just like in my dream. It was weird because it happened exactly as in my dream. Other than that, the house didn't have any scary or creepy elements or anything. My friends were all hanging out at my rich friend's parents' old mansion that was super extremely haunted. He had lots of enthusiastic golden retrievers that balanced out the palpable ghost-ridden environment. Other than that, it was just 5 of us guys. Once in a while something small happened that we dismissed. Something moving. Weird creepy whispering. Dark areas of the house being creepy. All the furniture was from the early 20th century. But one time we were all sitting outside on his patio and hanging out chatting. My friends were smoking some cigarettes. Some hitting a roar. In the middle of conversation there was this loud ethereal operatic singing coming from slightly above us. Came out of nowhere. It was extremely bizarre and we all stopped, looked at each other, freaked out and ran. We all sat down at the huge dinner table inside the house and tried to rationalize it but couldn't. To this day that is the only not explainable paranormal thing that has happened to me. One time I was pooping and when I was done I looked in the bowl and it was empty. Is it messed up that I'm jealous of these creepy stories? Nothing interesting ever happens to me. and I'm completely desensitized to horror movies and haunted houses. I feel like I'm eternally trying to recapture the now unattainable rush of genuine mystery, spookiness, and fear that scary things had when I was a kid. My godmother is on a paranormal research team. She uses an EVP machine. After walking in the child section of the cemetery, you can hear multiple voices on the tape say, "Go away. We don't want you here. Let us rest." Her daughter was having weird shit happen to her in the cellar at the restaurant she works. Felt like she was having her hair pulled and stuff. So she took the EVP in, and the tape has a voice saying, "Pretty Hannah. Love Hannah. Edit. Not imp. EVP. I work in a relatively old building. 200 years old maybe. Used to be a hospital. Typical. But there's some toilets not often used because they're in an awkward place. On several occasions I've heard someone whisper my name despite the fact the area is empty. On one occasion I heard them say my name followed by "watch out." Nothing bad happened, or has happened. Probably my mind filling the quiet. Posted this before. My 4-year-old son had a habit of announcing when he had to use the bathroom. He would say, "I gotta go potty." One time he makes his business known and heads off toward the bathroom. He returns seconds later and says there's already someone in the bathroom. Now I do know for a fact that it's just the two of us home, so the hair stands up on my neck. I ask him, "What do you mean?" He repeats, "There's already someone in the bathroom." Now I'm thinking, is it someone I see dead people or someone in a hockey goalie mask? So I grab the biggest knife from my knife block and tell him to stay here. I walk to the bathroom, take a wide angle to see in. Nobody. Slowly and quietly walk toward the shower and pull back the curtain. Nothing. By now my son has walked around the corner and I ask him, "Where did you see the person?" He points to an unflushed toilet and says, "See. Someone's already here. His big brother didn't flush the toilet." I've posted this before, but I'll share it here as well. So, just a few important points of note here, to set the stage for what is to come. I used to love just sitting on a swing in my backyard at night, and listening to music. It was, and still is really, very cathartic, because I live basically right on the edge of a fairly large and densely wooded area. Also, my best friend B lived 2 houses down from me, and went running every single night. Rain, snow, sleet, sick, whatever. I could probably count on one hand the amount of days he hasn't gone running. In the past 10 years or so, there isn't any wildlife where I live that I'm really nervous about, aside from bobcats, or maybe black bears or coyotes, but all of those avoid people, and I've never heard of someone seeing a bear where I'm from. Also, I make it a point to try to work through things as rationally as possible, and I also make it a point for myself to try not to freak out about random creepy stuff, because I hate feeling afraid or helpless, and there's always an explanation. Anyways, one night, just like any other night, around maybe 10 PM or so, I decided to go sit on the swing. I gathered my jacket, headphones, and a beer, and walked outside. Immediately upon stepping onto my driveway, I got this really weird feeling, like I was being watched, thinking nothing of it, because it was nighttime, and it was probably just my primitive brain. I turned the corner by the edge of the house and started walking back towards the swing set. Every step that I took, that uneasy feeling got stronger and stronger, until it had almost reached panicky levels. I could feel it in my stomach. My body suddenly felt very cold. And at this point, I accepted mentally that I was alarmed about something. However, I still rationalized it as my primitive brain just doing its job. The weird thing is, As I got closer to the swings, I started getting more and more nervous than I already was. I reflexively started walking slower, to the point that eventually, I came to a complete stop about 10 feet away and, accepting that something felt really weird, began to look around and at the woods. Something was seriously wrong. It felt different outside than ever before. Now, I'm a pretty big guy, and athletic. I say that to emphasize that I was in no way concerned about a person walking out of the woods. Absolute worst case scenario, I feel comfortable asserting that I'd be able to outrun 95% of people, and that's if I couldn't physically best them. I just say that to emphasize that the possibility of there being some dude hanging out in my backyard and hurting me wasn't even on my radar. Also, there are no recorded confirmed black bear attacks where I'm from, and chances are high that I'd survive a black bear and or a bobcat attack, barring freak circumstances. And, like I mentioned earlier, there haven't been any bears seen in my town that I know of, and I feel like it would take a really scared rabbit, or hungry bobcat or coyote to just randomly come out of the woods to attack a person. I say that to emphasize that I wasn't really concerned about any wildlife. Additionally, I kind of go out of my way to make it a point to not be afraid of stuff, even when I am. Like, the concept of being afraid scares me more than most things, so I work pretty hard at suppressing that. Anyways, I tried to force the weirdness out of my mind, but as I settled down onto the swing, I was afraid. I had no idea why, or of what, and I was trying to suppress it, but I knew deep down I was scared. Something was seriously fucking wrong. Now, usually, I'll swing for like an hour or so, maybe going through like 20-25 songs, and, obviously, I jam out, so I turn the volume all the way up, and I just kind of zone out and daydream. So, I swang, through one song, pausing the music every once in a while to listen to the night, which I never do. I literally got through one song, stop and go, and the feeling just kept getting stronger. It wasn't the normal hair standing up on the back of your neck scared. It literally felt like there was this overwhelming, malicious presence that was just heavy in the air. I swear, I could almost feel it just pressing down on me, from all around. It felt hateful, and, I never use this word because I think it's been cheapened by religious fanatics, but it was evil. There's no way around it. Something bad, really bad, was there. Something was really fucking wrong. So, I got up and turned to swing facing the woods, which I never used to do, because my friend B would sneak up on me from the front yard sometimes if did that. I got through maybe half of the next song, and somehow this feeling had continued to get stronger. It felt urgent. I've read in books descriptions like bone-chillingly terrifying, and too scared to move, and I always kind of shrugged them off as hyperbole. I certainly had never experienced anything even close to that until that night. I was fucking terrified, and I feel like I can't emphasize that enough. Like, I can't properly verbalize this feeling. I swear to God I could feel it in my bones, and my muscles. I was literally shivering. I've never been worried like that before. I'm a person. I reign supreme of all the animals. But in that moment, it hit me like an epiphany. I felt like prey. I couldn't see anything bad out there. I couldn't hear anything, smell anything. But I was completely and utterly horrified beyond all rationality. Like, almost on the brink of tears. I didn't know why, and I couldn't rationalize it. So I tried to just go on with what I was doing like nothing was up. But it just kept getting. The only way I can think to describe it is heavier. and heavier. You know those videos of the mice shaking with terror before they're eaten by a snake? That's probably the closest description to what I looked and felt like. I turned my music off, and just sat, beer forgotten, looking around and at the woods, searching, desperately searching for anything that could explain how I felt so I could write it off as a stupid overreaction on my part. Just completely stock still except my head, refusing to surrender to my baser instincts, despite everything in me telling me to run. It was a warm summer night, and I was freezing. I know how corny that sounds, but I swear, I think about this moment several times a week, and it was years ago. I could feel it all the way to my bones, and my stomach was a knot of ice. It was seriously the strangest feeling I've ever had. I could just feel this sense of impending doom, and also this utterly malicious presence. It was like a panic attack, mixed with that stomach-dropping feeling when you know something bad happened but you don't know what, mixed with when you hear something in the house that you know had to be a person, but your family hadn't said anything about coming to the house that night. It was all of those feelings combined, and with the feeling that you're being watched, and that feeling you get when you know someone doesn't like you but you don't know why. It was all of those feelings combined were all terror, and all amplified like 100 times. I've never been more scared in my life. I literally couldn't take it anymore. Physically, I just couldn't take it. I could barely breathe. I was such a mess. I jumped off the swing, and sprinted back inside, closed and locked the door, checked all the doors and windows, closed all the curtains, turned on all the lights and surrounded myself with an arsenal of melee weapons. In the middle of the living room, I could still feel it, but it slowly faded. I didn't sleep that night, which never happens to me. I can pass out almost at a whim, but I was too high-strung to sleep or eat, or leave the couch. I just sat. No TV, no books, just sat, thinking about what the fuck just happened. The next morning, I saw my friend be out by his car, so I walked over and started telling him about it because I was so confused and pretty deeply disturbed by the experience. Even after that long body of text, I don't feel like I've conveyed how bizarre and terrifying it actually was. So, as I'm telling him, he held up a hand and said, hold on, stop right there. Come with me. So, we went into his house and we walked up to his little sister, S. He said, hey S, what did I say last night when I came in from running? Why didn't I go running last night? And she looked at us weird and said something to the effect of, you felt like something was out there, and you didn't feel safe. She said that, completely unaware of what I'd been saying. Apparently, and he lives 2 houses down from me, he walked outside to stretch before his run that night, and felt a weird vibe. As he walked to the end of his driveway, it got stronger and he started getting nervous. He started running, and stopped after a few feet, turned his music off, and scanned the woods. Then, he started running again, got to my driveway, and was so scared, uncomfortable, and freaked out that he just decided to call it quits for the night. He never does that. When we were talking about it the next day after talking to his sister, he said that he literally felt like a prey animal being stalked by something evil. It was exactly, almost to the T, how I'd felt. Everyone always kind of laughs it off when we tell them that story, or thinks we somehow colluded and matched our stories up. But he specifically took me in to talk to us before I spoke, so that I'd know there was no bullshit. I have absolutely no idea what it was, and it hasn't happened again since, and that was like 3-4 years ago. Anyways, now I only swing facing the woods. and I carry a bat down there with me, even though I don't feel like I need it, but just in case. That's the weirdest thing that's ever happened to me, and I still think about it all time. Also, here's one that really freaked me out that's a bit more paranormally freaky. So, my mom's dad died when she was 2. My grandmom never remarried or dated, so my mom grew up without a father figure in her life. It really affected her, in a way that's really hard to describe, and still does to this day. She talks about it a lot, and tends to be very dependent and fragile. I think because my grandmom raised her very sheltered. My mom kind of has this obsession with her dad, and is constantly asking my grandmom and other relatives about him, and what he was like, which is understandable, but still sad. He died a long time ago, 50 plus years, so she only has a handful of pictures of him, which she really cherishes, all black and white. One of these few pictures was a small, black and white picture of him sitting on a porch with his mom, aka my mom's grandmother, or my great-grandmother. In the picture, they were seated about 5 feet apart from each other, each on one side of the picture. The picture itself was in a small frame, on the dining room, on top of this weird desk cabinet thing. It was on a shelf pretty high up, 5.5 featuring off the ground, and recessed by about 2 feet because of the desk. I note this to emphasize that it wasn't like on an end table or something, it wasn't easily accessed. Behind it in the frame was a baby picture of my brother. You know how people will put a picture in a frame over another one, but for whatever reason leave the previous one in there, behind it. Anyways, one day, on my way home from work, I got a call from my mom. She was really quiet and distressed, and asked me, "Hey, did you do that to my picture?" I had absolutely no idea what the fuck she was talking about, so I said so. We moved on, hung up, and I drove home. When I got there, I asked her what she'd been referring to, and she showed me the picture. Holy shit. Someone had cut out her dad and his mom and placed them side by side together in the frame. It was done very sloppily, and the rest of the picture was gone. The picture of my brother was nowhere to be found. We looked through the trash for the pictures, my brother, and the rest of the pic of her dad, and they weren't there. It was really bizarre, and they weren't like lovingly cut out. When I say sloppy, just imagine when you were a little kid and had to cut something small out pretty fast, so you basically just got the general shape, and that was enough. I mean, a section of the man's head was lopped off. After investigating and asking questions, this is the information we have. It wasn't me, unless I just randomly got completely blackout one night, retained the motor skills to do something like that, and for some reason covered my tracks and, for some reason had the motivation to do it. According to my mom, it wasn't her. According to him, it wasn't my brother. It wasn't my mom's fiancé. My dad doesn't have keys to the house, and also said it wasn't him. Additional info: the aforementioned 4 of us, mom, me, brother, fiancé, are the only ones with unrestricted access to the house. That is, have keys. Only my brother and I ever drink. My mom occasionally has a glass of wine or something, but she's really tiny and medicated, so she gets trashed if she drinks any more than that. My mom and dad both think it was one of my friends from when we pre-gamed at the house one night, but, A, I asked everyone it could have been, in a completely neutral way, and they were all baffled. B, none of them were ever alone long enough to do that, let alone find scissors, pick out a picture, especially one that is so clearly important. Nice frame. Black and white. not immediately recognizable people to non-family, and do the deed without being noticed, time would death be an issue? And why would they keep the trash and my brother's baby pig? See, the sloppy cutting and the way all the evidence was disposed death makes it seem malicious, but they were slid closer together, so someone, presumably, knew they were related. None of my friends would have. None of my friends would have fucking done that because it's rude, presumptuous, and weird as fuck. And we're all in our mid-20s, and close. We pre-gamed at the house once over break, one time. And it was a pre-game. There's no way anyone got drunk enough to accidentally fuck that up. Or, like I said, was alone long enough to do that. That's not something a burglar would do. I mean, seriously, WTF. I used to drink with my ex's mom's ghost, so I'm really good friends with my ex's cousin, and he used to house watch for his family who lived out of state. Well, their spare house that he watched had an indoor pool, so of course we had to drink there all the time. My ex's mom had some serious alcohol issues, and died of intoxication on that property about 15 years prior to this. A lot of people we brought over there claimed to see the ghost of Debbie, but I hadn't seen her yet. Well, until the day I broke up with her daughter. That night Debbie slammed a door right in front of my face. I instantly knew it was her, though I wasn't scared at all. I knew she should be mad at me. I left her daughter to hang. About a week later, I was going to meet my friend over there to chill, but he told me to just let myself in because he was a bit behind. So I ended up pouring myself a drink and sat down at the grand piano. For whatever reason I felt the need to tell Debbie my side of the story. Let her know that I really did love her daughter, and it really was both of our faults why we had to go our separate ways. After feeling like a fool for talking to thin air, I poured another drink and started playing the piano, until all of a sudden I felt a real cold hand on my back. But no one was there. I felt really comforted by this though, as if she put her hand on me to let me know she understood my position. That house is sold now, no longer in that family, but I live a few miles away. I still drive by every once in a while and wonder if the new owners have seen Debbie as well. I kinda want to stop by and ask, though I also don't want to creep out the new owners, so I just let it go. This, not a lep webpage. I know it's posted in a subreddit known for its fiction, but every word of that story is true. My mom loves to tell it. I was lying in my bed when I saw a shadowy figure move past my door. The door had a window and the door was closed, and then realized that I was home alone. But no one was there, and misplaced items would appear everywhere. Like about 3 years ago I lost my flip phone that I got for a birthday, and about 3 months ago it reappeared next to my bed, on the floor, in the middle of my room. I'm a paranormal investigator, so I live for the creepy and paranormal. I seek it out. I've experienced a lot of creepy things. A while back we investigated the Sally house in Atchison, Kansas. This house is notorious for paranormal activity and the owners lease it to investigators. We'd already been there a few hours in the dark with no major incidents and had our equipment set up all over the place. We'd arranged toys on the floor in Sally's room. It's said that Sally will move them if you do that. We'd just finished a dinner break in the kitchen downstairs and went upstairs to check the equipment. When we got to the top of the stairs, the door to Sally's room was closed. None of us had closed it. Someone knocked on the door and asked, "Is anyone in there?" We heard a distinctly male voice say, "Number, just leave." I need to point out, we were all downstairs together. No one had gone upstairs to close the door. But any investigator will tell you in old houses doors sometimes close. No men were upstairs. We had 2 men in our group, both downstairs. BuzzFeed Unsolved did part of an episode on the Sally house. It was fascinating and super creepy. Yes, it was. I don't watch a lot of television investigations, but I do enjoy BuzzFeed Unsolved, mainly for Ryan and Shane. I think their dynamic works well and it's fun to watch since they don't take themselves too seriously. I'm put off by most ghost hunter shows since a lot of the investigators are super far in their own asses. Also, Ryan thinking everything is a ghost and freaking out is very funny. I agree. Every group needs a solid skeptic and Shane is great. He acknowledges that weird stuff happens sometimes but retains his skepticism and logic without coming across like a jerk. And he has a wonderful sense of humor. He can laugh at Ryan's reactions without laughing at or mocking Ryan. See, I want to believe this, but I live close to Atchison and the owners have outright told people they made it all up, multiple times. Told us how they did it, etc. My older sister, I think in her mid to late 30s at the time, was screwing around with an Ouija board. My family has a history of screwing around with them and weird shit happening, so I've never touched them. I'm a massive skeptic to everything. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe my sister was full of shit. Feel free to say I am making this shit up because it is very far-fetched. My sister might have been on drugs. Doubtful. Or maybe got some bad pot. But she wouldn't lie to me about this. So yes, story goes I guess that she was playing Ouija with her friends, and the board had spelled out some words that implied the entity on the Ouija board was a person trapped in hell, and that it needed their help getting out. It spelled out a first and last name and that this person needed to be stopped. Stop Jim Doe or find him or something. After they wrapped up their messing with the board, my sister made a note of what the person said in the name and stored it. As I said, our family has had weird coincidences around the board and have learned to write that shit down. Fast forward 3 or 4 days later and I get a phone call from my older sister and she's freaking out. She opened with something along the lines of, I swear I am not making this shit up. I know you're the only one in the family who won't think I'm nuts or that I am lying when I tell you this. Then went on to tell me the aforementioned story about the Ouija board and someone trapped in hell and needing them to stop this guy. Apparently she was reading the newspaper a few days after messing with the board and there was a small article about a car accident with a family and a drunk driver. Everyone in the incident died. Family, a couple kids, husband and wife, and the drunk driver. The drunk driver's name, which as she said damn near made her spit out her coffee, was the name from the Ouija board that she wrote down. Edit. My family writes this stuff down cause my mom had a similar experience where when she was a teenager she asked it if she would ever get married and it told her HG, then asked how many kids she'd have and it said RMTA. My mom wrote down the questions and answers, kept the note in a keepsake box because there was a bunch of other questions she actually got real quantifiable answers for and she wanted to see if they came true. None of them did. But she said a chill ran down her spine when she got to the questions about her getting married and having kids. HG is the initials of my dad, and RMTA is the first names of her 4 kids, in order of which they were born. I still think it's just a odd coincidence given it's just 6 different letters that could be associated with any number of things relating to family life. I dunno, I take all of this with a huge grain of salt. I was driving into work one morning on the highway, I always do. As I am trucking along I notice that the car ahead of me has a rear passenger and they seem to be looking at me. Now, mind you, I am doing about 65 miles per hour and while my eyesight isn't bad it also isn't 20/20, but regardless this person seems to be staring me down. Initially I don't pay it a lot of attention since it may just be a kid or someone trying to get a rise out of other morning time motorists. However, the closer I get I notice that the passenger isn't moving. Even closer still I notice what it really is. The owner of the car has replaced his rear headrest with a fully makeup-ed mannequin head, facing rear. I immediately began to slow and put some distance between him and myself, out of fear he may memorize my license plate. Maybe more than paranormal or creepy, but still. Dude probably did that to creep out tailgaters. Sounds like it was pretty effective lol. So when I was 18 and in my freshman year of college, I was out in my own for the first time in my life. I learned the hard way that I never developed any kind of internal structure in my life, and that my parents always making sure I did my HW went to class was something I relied on. Long story short, I didn't do either of those things and I got straight F's. The writing was on the wall for a while, but it was all still a huge shock to a guy who was all A's and B's and got like a 15,000 scholarship. I'm not sure what happened but I found myself sitting in this big bay window on the 4th floor of my dorm about to throw myself off. I was ready. I had to convince myself that I was never going to be the person everyone had expected of me, that I was worthless and good for nothing. I hadn't exercised for 3 months. I had isolated myself from all my friends. I leaned forward, and I swear I felt a tugging at my shirt pinning me in place. I knew I wanted to, I had to. I couldn't face my parents as a failure. But something kept me on that ledge until some passerbys saw me and had the raw come and talk me down. It probably was self-preservation kicking in, but I swear it felt like every bit of me wanted to be human jelly on the concrete. Whatever it was, I'm glad it was there. I'm doing a lot better now, and I hope whatever it was is still out there stopping people from making the ultimate mistake. When I was a little kid I was alone playing with my toys in the room that my dad, stepmom, brother, and I all shared. I was maybe 6-7. I can't remember exactly. Suddenly there's a tapping on the window and I look up to see a man standing there. So I went to the window and opened. I remember he asked me if I knew how to get to some place that he was walking to, but I didn't and I told him that. He thanked me anyways and I closed the window. Just at that moment my dad comes in and asks who I was talking to. I told him the man at the window needed help, but I didn't know where he was going so I couldn't help him. My dad looks confused, and he tells me it's impossible that a man was right at the window because the bedroom is on the 2nd story. I've posted this before in plenty of AskReddit threads, so if this seems familiar, it's probably because you've read it from me before. I'd just like to keep my experience out here. I wrote it out and explained every little detail like a story so I could best explain what it felt like to be out there when this happened. This isn't a novelette story or creative writing. I understand if you don't believe me. I wouldn't either if I hadn't seen it myself. That being said, let the copy-paste from my previous comment begin. This is going to be a bit out there for most people, but what I'm about to type out is true and actually happened to me. If you choose not to believe me, that's fine. I wouldn't expect you to. Just don't be a dick about it. This all happened around late May to early June in 2017. I live out in Kentucky and have been here my whole life. I saved up some money and bought my first AR-style rifle, Ruger AR 556 for anyone who cares. I had wanted one for a while but never had the money to get one. So as soon as I got a chance, I grabbed it. I needed to sight in my gun after I bought. My family owns 20 plus acres of land, so I don't go to gun ranges around here because, first of all, people are dumb and our local one has bullet holes in the ceiling. And second, I prefer shooting on our own land. I had managed to get a Magpul D60 drum magazine at Gander Mountain because they were having a going out of business sale. So I guess really I was going to sight in the gun and test out the magazine's reliability. I barely had the magazine out of the box and had not gotten a chance to shoot it yet. But I looked up a bunch of reviews and couldn't ever find one that had the problems mine did that day. This is where things start getting a bit odd. My family has owned this land I shoot on for decades. Nothing weird has ever happened out here that I know of, and I have taken people to the spot this happened at and nothing has recreated the feelings I had that day. I grabbed my gun, the drum, and 20 rounds of ammo and went outside to cross over to our field. To get to the field, I have to go through a barbed wire fence and about 300 foot of wooded area. The moment I crossed over the barbed wire, something felt off. I have been over there 1,000 times before. And like I said, nothing weird had ever happened down there and I have never had any weird experiences there. Something just felt off that day, like something wanted me to leave. I kept going though because nothing had ever happened out here before. I just thought maybe I was being paranoid or the wind and air pressure were just right to give a eerie feeling. So I walk on deeper into the woods. The further I get, the stronger the feeling is. I feel like I'm being watched, like something nearby is just staring into my soul. I keep going. I get halfway and this feeling is borderline unbearable. I stop dead in my tracks and think to myself something is off. Like I've said 1,000 times, nothing like this has ever happened before. I know something is going on now. When I grabbed my ammo when I left home, I did not load it into the magazine because I wanted to hurry and get to the field so I could get everything set up. This is where I listened to that gut feeling. I stopped dead in my tracks and loaded the magazine with the 20 rounds I brought. Something told me that something wasn't right and I needed to be ready just in case. Something is watching me and I don't know what it is or where it is. As I am loading my magazine, out of nowhere I smell something dead. It just came out of nowhere. I had been standing there for 2 minutes with no scent. Then all of a sudden, it smells like a month-old rotting carcass is beside me. I look around and directly behind me is a mangled animal, that aside from the smell, looks merely fresh. It was so mangled. The only thing that gave me a clue as to what the animal is was the color of what was left of its fur, which was a white-gray color. It was a rabbit or possum. The smell did not go along with the age of this. Whatever I caught the stench of, that wasn't it. I finished loading the magazine, immediately stuck it in my gun, and held the bolt open that way if I tripped, my gun wouldn't fire accidentally. For some reason, I kept fucking going. I'm nearly out of the woods. I can see the field I'm going to dead ahead. That's when it happened. This entire time, I've been walking alongside a creek. The creek turns to the left as you approach the field I was going to. As I got to the turn in the creek, I heard a large splash in the water. I turned quickly and what I seen I'll never forget. This thing was easily 8-9 feet tall and stood on 2 legs. Aside from the water splash, it was dead silent. It had very long arms and long legs. It was a light brown color, almost the color of a deer. Updating this to say I got thinking about it the other day. I think it was much lighter brown than a deer. It still had a brownish look to it, but not that dark. Maybe it actually was gray and the lighting made it look a light shade of brown. But it looked like skin, not fur. Perhaps the freakiest thing about it was its size. It looked severely malnourished. Very skinny and tight skin across its body. Imagine taking a fully grown man that only weighs 120 pounds and stretching him out to be 9 feet tall. But he stays the same width and doesn't get skinnier as you stretch him out. It had somewhat off-road walk too. But this could have been caused by the mud near the creek bed. It never faced me, so I did not get a chance to see its front. It just kept walking and never turned around. This scared the absolute shit out of me. I was 99% sure I knew what this thing was. I tried to close the bolt on my gun to chamber around just in case this thing turned around to fight. I had no intention of shooting this thing unless it gave a sign it was going to attack. If it was what I hunk it was, the gun wouldn't have done anything but piss it off anyway. When I tried to chamber around, the magazine would not let go of the round. The force of the bolt closing would break your finger if you were to close it on your finger. I had been loading and unloading the magazine the day before to help loosen the spring to make it easier to load in the future. I could take the rounds out with my hand, but when I come across this fucking thing, somehow, it decides it wants to keep the fucking bullet. By now, the thing is gone and I'm basically sitting there with my dick in my hand. That magazine never worked right again. I kept it a few more days but had to send it back because it was tearing up my ammo. It would hold on to bullets so tight. The bolt tried to close and just scratched a gouge so deep in the casing. Powder was almost leaking out. After it walked off, I realized if I had shot, I would have deafened myself. It caught me so off guard I almost fired a 5.56 round in a heavily wooded area without air protection. I had brought some with me but didn't have it on. Now to answer some questions. What was it? To be honest, I have no fucking clue what it actually was. Me and a friend who knows more about this stuff than I do did some looking around and have narrowed it down. Skinwalker, Goat Man, or, what I'm afraid it is, a Wendigo. If you want a very good idea of what it looked like, look up the Wendigo from the game Until Dawn. Aside from the color, it is exactly what I saw. And before anyone thinks I am just describing the one from the game, I didn't even know about the game until after I had my encounter. When I seen the gameplay, it actually made me very uncomfortable because of how much it resembles what I saw. Everything I seen matched a Wendigo perfectly. Stench of death, mangling animals to scare intimidate humans, long arms, malnourished, tight skin. Most are grey but I have heard about brown ones. Except one thing, its behavior. They are supposed to be hyper-aggressive and basically kill anything they see or drag it off and eat it alive. So why didn't it get me? It had ample opportunity to but never did. Why did it walk off and turn its back toward me? I have not told my family, mainly because I do not think they will believe me and they will think I'm crazy. I think my dad could have possibly seen it or something else at one point too. Before I seen it, out of nowhere he started burning sage around the house saying that he liked the smell. Even thought he has never said he liked it before and has never burned it here before. Now for some info about the land. In case anyone didn't know, the Wendigo is a Native American legend. They are a human who resorted to cannibalism and a Wendigo spirit took them over after they ate and turned them into this monster. I live in Kentucky. There were and still are Native Americans here. I find tons of flint every year on my family's land. The same land I seen it on. And an occasional arrowhead. They were definitely on my family's land. My mom has a lot of Native American blood in her, so that means I have some too. And now for the most important part of this story. Me and a friend who I have told this story just realized 2 weeks ago. There is a trail of tear site less than 5 miles away. Just checked. It's actually just over 2 miles away. from my doorstep. It is entirely possible this thing could have came from that. If anyone has any questions, feel free to ask. I'll answer best I can. Also, if anyone has any info that could help me determine what it was for sure or how to tell if it's still around, I'd appreciate it. It's been almost a year and I haven't seen it again. I'm going to make this short because I should be studying for my exam in an hour, but here goes. My mother died of cancer when I was 9. Fast forward through 9 years of depression and trying to learn how to deal with it. Avid drug user to try and cope. Not healthy, I know. Decides to take powdered DMT. Closer to ayahuasca than DMT really, a very spiritual drug. Have mild visuals for a couple hours, but nothing crazy. Decide to go for a walk by myself to this lake my mother and I visited all the time as a kid. Start talking to her randomly because I'm feeling lost and confused in my life. All of a sudden, the wind picks up heavily, but only in a circle around me. I could see trees in the distance not moving at all. Lake was still, literally only around me. Wind wasn't cold either. I could actually feel warmth just coating me like a hug. She could hear me and was trying to comfort me. Out of nowhere, a crane appears and flies down by the water. As I look at it, it turns, stares at me for 10 seconds, then vanishes into thin air. To this day, cranes have always resonated with me as my mother's spirit watching over me. People are going to say it was the drugs that made this experience happen. I don't care. At the time and still now I know she was there trying to communicate to me that everything was going to be okay. At a birthday sleepover at my friend's house in 5th grade, we were playing with a Ouija board. We had asked a bunch of questions and we were getting answers, but one of the girls weren't convinced, so they said if we're talking to an actual spirit here in this room right now, do something to make us believe you. At that moment, a birthday balloon in the corner of the room dropped to the floor. We all freaked out and boxed up the Ouija board and never touched it again. I don't care if those have been disapproved. I am absolutely not giving anything permission to control my body. I was 13, I think, going through severe depression, crying a lot for no reason most of the night. Got up to go to the washroom and wash my face. When I got out of the washroom, there was this thing, hovering by the TV table in the hallway. It had limbs but very long fingers with long nails. Hair was like an afro but with long strands of spiky locks. I can't remember the facial features, but I remember staring at it in disbelief, and it smiling back at me. I remember how the feet were floating few inches from the ground and how the white gown it wore was flowing. After I looked away and looked at the same place where it was gone. I never saw it again. I have never hallucinated in my life. It seemed very real, like actually seeing another person in front of you, and the distance between the washroom and the living is not far. Close enough to see someone smile, or blink. Remember, carbon monoxide is a deadly, odorless gas that can cause hallucinations. If you are having strange occurrences in your home, get a CO detector. That's a sobering comment in the middle of all this hocus pocus creepy shit. When I was younger I saw a demonic possession. More accurately, I saw someone who was possessed. I've talked and written about this before, but as of late I've wanted to talk about it again. Apologies in advance if there are any issues with my typing. I'm on mobile, so I was young. I can't say exactly what age, but my brother, 5 years my elder, was old enough to operate the soundboard at the church my family attended. This was a night service on Sunday, around 6 p.m. in either late fall or early winter. I remember that when services ended it was dark out, but not dead of night dark, and services ended at around 8 p.m. me and my brother were in the back of the room where services were held by the soundboard. My grandfather, who was watching us, is also the pastor at said church. He was, and still is, a man of dogma and strong faith who has told stories about demonic possessions, faith healing, and divine intervention. My grandfather was in the back with us making sure that my brother understood what he had to do to operate the soundboard, and I was trying to learn a thing or two about it, since the large board of dials and levers looked like magic to me. In walks a woman. This woman is young, maybe 25, but she looks bad. Her hair is disheveled, she's got bags under her eyes, and she looks very pale. However, she does not look homeless. She's wearing nice clothes, lifts, and some jewelry. I don't recall having seen this woman before. She quietly takes a seat at the front of the room by the altar and pulpit. Service begins with 10 minutes of hymns as usual from these thick green books that the church has about 100 of. The woman doesn't stand or participate, but she's quiet and not distracting. Then my grandfather takes to the pulpit. He begins his sermon, which I can't remember what it was on because I was focused on the woman who was now rocking in her seat. Weird. My brother is trying to get the recording hardware attached to the sound system to work. The issue isn't that it won't record, however. The issue is that when my brother put a disc in to record, it broke. It was fine for the morning service and no settings were touched on the recording system. The disc literally broke in half. Service goes on with the woman getting more distracting until the service ends and me and my brother are escorted out. Everyone else goes home without staying to talk, which is unusual. I sat on the walkway with my brother and grandmother outside the church while my grandfather and the officers of the church were inside with the woman. I could hear verses from the Bible being recited, screaming, and I saw the lights flickering through the window in the door. About 10 minutes later they all come out and the woman looks much better. The bags under her eyes are gone. Her hair is still a mess but it looks shinier and healthy, and she thanks my grandfather before getting into her car and leaving. I'd fully say this was just a woman with mental illness if not for the way the sound system acted and the way that she changed when all was said and done. I live in a two-bedroom apartment with my wife. When you enter the apartment there is a bathroom immediately to the left. A small, open concept kitchen to the right and past that is the living room. Just outside the bathroom is an old microwave stand that we have a bunch of papers and pens on in an organizer, some lactase supplement pills, and one of those electric candle warmers that uses a heat lamp to heat up a candle so that you get the scent without actually lighting it. A few months ago I got out of bed in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. All the lights in the house were off. I go into the bathroom and sit down on the toilet. I messed around on my phone longer than I should have, maybe 10 to 15 minutes or so. At this point the only light that was on is the bathroom light. I finished up in the bathroom, washed my hands, hit the light switch and stepped into the hallway. This fucking candle warmer light is on. I stopped dead in my tracks for maybe 30 seconds listening to see if my wife or son, he's a toddler who can't get out of his crib, were awake. Silence. At this point I'm creeped out. I'm desperately trying to rack my brain to remember if I turned this light on my way into the bathroom. I know I didn't. I go into the bedroom and wake up my wife, who is snoring and sound asleep. I say, "Hey, did you turn any lights on?" She tells me, "No, you must have left it on." So I say, "You didn't turn the candle warmer on?" "I don't think I've ever turned it on." She wakes up and we both go into the hallway where this thing is glowing. She's like, "You're messing with me. You turned this on." I insist that I didn't because I know I didn't. We decide to check it out. I flip on the kitchen light and suddenly the candle warmer goes off. Interesting. I think to myself, the warmer is activated by a switch that's on a cord behind the microwave stand. It would take some effort for a person to reach back there and turn it on. It's not really something you could do without meaning to. We flip the kitchen light switch back off and it stays off the entire time. I flip the switch on the candle warmer and it comes back on and stays on no matter what other switches I flip. We decide that something must be wrong with the thing and toss it down the garbage chute. I have no idea what caused this anomaly. I'm a pretty militant atheist, but this legitimately creeped the living shit out of me. I know we have some issues with GFIs flipping in that part of the house if you flip too many switches in the bathroom at once, but nothing really seemed like it was wired to the outlet that warmer was plugged into. Edit. GFIs, not GFRs.